I see quite a few familiar faces.
Good evening, Steve.
Steve, I couldn't tell if you were trying to talk before or if your lips were just moving. That would make you a politician who was lying, wouldn't it?
No, I guess my lips were just moving. And I couldn't hear you just now because I was fiddling with my external speaker, which is now working.
Okay.
I see Larry is there.
Okay. Larry.
I want Mario's workbench. That's a dandy.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh. Good evening, Steve.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good, thank you.
This is my first time joining the meeting.
Hi.
Got an interest in old TVs.
I guess you came to the right place.
Misery loves company.
I don't know. Interest is kind of a low-key term. Obsession might be a little bit more accurate, but that's another story.
Speaking of obsessions, is it okay if I ask a simple question?
Of course.
Knock yourself out. We got 2 minutes before we start.
Okay. I've got a little problem, sort of. I've got like a 1952 or a 1953 CBS television set. It's just a regular 21-inch, non-descriptive like console, and it's made by CBS. Was CBS television, or were they trying to get into the TV market? Every time I try to find any information on it, I go nowhere on it. Does anybody have any more info on it, or where they came from, or what was CBS or the network trying to do, or any intel on that?
You know what I would do? I'd post a picture of that on that Facebook Television Collectors Club, post a picture of the front of the set and the back inside, and somebody might recognize it and like say, oh, I recognize that chassis, or I recognize that cabinet, and you'll get some information that way. A lot of knowledge on that page.
I don't know anything about the particular TV, although I do know CBS did make TVs. One of the problems, they were originally going to make some color TVs, was one of the ideas. And there was the CBS Hytron tubes, and they made picture tubes too. They did all kinds of stuff. I think they eventually decided this wasn't a good idea since there was 47,000 TV manufacturers, though.
There's a really cute story that was published on the David Sarnoff Library Museum website. I'll dig that out and send that to you, Julian, by an engineer who worked at CBS, who, he was there while this was happening, while the color wars were happening. And he tells a pretty funny story about how, CBS was kind of like the dog that caught the bus when their system got approved, and how they basically celebrated. They wiped the sweat off their brow when they were knocked out of the ring finally and said, whew, oh boy, are we glad that didn't go any further. So I don't know how, it's not an apocryphal story. It was told by an engineer who worked for CBS. So I tend to believe him.
It's just a nondescript set. I mean, to look at it, it's rather plain. And I only bought it because it was a CBS for no other reason. But I just wondered what kind of a colorful history, no pun intended, would it be? That were they trying to get into the TV medium of selling sets, not just broadcasting to them? And But it's an interesting story, I'm sure, but at least I have an example of it, and you never see them turn up, or it's very rare that you find them anywhere.
Hey, Julian, you still there?
Me?
Yeah, you. Look
Hey.
up CBS Columbia. They were a subsidiary of Columbia Broadcast System. Looked it up on the phone
Okay.
and came up with an ad for a couple of the TVs.
Oh, good, good. That's the first good lead I've had. I've tried to find it or something, but like I said, I've got it more of a historical thing. As a TV, it's just, it's nothing to write home about. It's just a 21-inch plain console, stands
Yep.
up about 40 inches off the floor. But nonetheless, yeah, Columbia Broadcasting System,
CBS Columbia.
CBS Columbia. Better write that down so I don't forget. Thank you,
Both
Jeff.
my mother and grandmother worked for Columbia Records back in the 40s and 50s, and that ultimately got bought out by CBS, quote unquote, for Columbia Records and Tapes. And I have a Columbia record player and a Columbia radio, but it turns out they weren't really made by CBS or Columbia. They were just chassis that, other companies built. I think the Columbia radio was actually a very early Japanese Panasonic, even though it's a tube radio from late 50s, early 60s. So there was a lot of that going on. That CBS television, who knows? It might be an RCA or it might be an Emerson or who knows what it is, but just badged as a CBS.
Yeah, I imagine it was a contract marketed set. I can't imagine CBS themselves having a factory manufacturing TVs. Jeff, did you say that was CBS Columbia, or how did
Yeah.
you?
CBS Columbia TV set is what I searched on, and it brings up a whole bunch of stuff.
Good. I'll do some homework tonight on that.
Yep.
Should be interesting. Have you got a CBS in your museum?
Yeah, I think there's one down there.
Is it a console or a portable, or were they all made the same way, or do you
They
know?
had both, I believe.
We've had several CBSs come through at various auctions. We've never put one on display.
It was just too plain for you?
Well, our concentration is on stuff pre-1950,
Oh,
and their stuff was mid-50s, early to mid-50s. So we just made the decision not to put it on display.
gotcha.
They are very plain. There's not much to them.
Yeah, I just thought it's just something interesting when you get into CBS and NBC and stuff like that. I guess they just wanted to get in the TV industry, both kind of like what the theaters did, like Lowe's. They not only, made movies and stuff, but they wanted to own the theaters as well until they broke them up there at the time. But I just wondered if CBS was trying to do the same thing.
Well, why don't we get started? Pardon my harsh voice. I've got a sort of a sore throat. But let's start with a welcome everybody to the February meeting. Let's start with Dave giving his normal courtesy speech.
Okay, hey, well, welcome everybody. We got a good turnout tonight. That's always a good sign. People looking forward to this. Yeah, my usual admonishing, just please keep your microphones turned off so that we can keep kind of a lid on the chaos here, at least on the audio chaos. But do feel free to jump in during Steve's presentation or during the panel discussion following if you do have a question or a comment. We do want to hear from you then. Just when you're flushing the toilet or breaking dishes, we don't want to hear from you then. So that should work out great.
Thanks, Dave. Why don't we go ahead and see if there are any newcomers that would like to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, this is my first time. My name is Bill Phantom, and I'm the vice president of the Northland Antique Radio Club and live up here in Minnesota. And I have an interest in old televisions, haven't had it for a long time. I own 3 1950s color sets. I got a 1951 Philco black and white that's my favorite, and just several other different models. I like this stuff. I like antique radios. Also collect antique fans. I'm on the board of directors of the Antique Fan Collectors Club, and just love old technology. And I heard about this, the museum, and someday I'd like to get out to the event that you guys put on. Should be a good time.
Great, we'd love to have you. And welcome to this meeting. Anybody else?
So I'll jump in there if I can. My name is Walt, call signs N8NXT. I stopped by the museum. I live in the Metro Detroit area, about midway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And stopped by the museum in 2016 with summer road construction. It took probably 4 to 4.5 hours just to arrive down there. But to my surprise, it was well worth it. Came in and actually got the access to the entire museum myself. It was just getting hot in an early spring day, late May. So I pretty much had a run of the place to myself, and I could circle back to things that I saw and interested me. I was very impressed with the museum and even the pre-war stuff. And I think it was a 30-inch round black and white CRT at the end of a long room that was a really large set. One of the guys fired it up for me, and I thought it was pretty impressive. And then just to summarize, I don't attend all the meetings, but there are a couple I have been very impressed with. One was a gentleman that runs the museum in Texas. His expertise and background was very impressive. He put on a really good presentation here in this forum. And then also there was another gentleman, I believe, lived in mid-Ohio, who was planning to move to Southern California, who was a Philco Predicta fanboy. And it was very interesting to learn that even though those sets have a Jetsons-like look to them, ultra-modern, they really didn't do that well because of durability concerns. And the PCB board being new with vacuum tubes was kind of a growing hurdle to be overcome. So the few meetings I've been to, I've been real impressed with, and I've pretty much stayed through the whole meeting. And just wanted to give you guys a heads up that I think the museum is just a wonderful place. Anybody who hasn't been there or has relatives that might be interested, it's worth taking a drive down there again and opening their mind up to it. So that's it for here in Detroit. Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. I'm glad you enjoyed the museum. Maybe it would be a good time to mention if the convention is coming up in May. So I'll talk more about that after we're finished with this part of it. That would be a great time to visit the museum. Anybody else?
Hello, I am Alexander from Poland. And this is my first time in this place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Well, I guess not. Welcome everybody. I hope you continue to participate in this meeting. It's really a good place to get all kinds of information and not just, we go all over the place. We had a presentation a couple of months ago about a company that was going to, in the 50s, that was going to sell a stove with a TV set in it. So we've had, all kinds of sort of different aspects of television, and we'll continue to try to do that. Let me give you a quick museum report. I think we passed 150 members today, which is quite good. The main time we get members is in our membership drive in November and December, and then also around the convention we get a number of people. So I think we're probably going to end up with more members than we had last year. Nothing really exciting new happening at the museum. We do have a new batch of CRTs. We mentioned it last month, but we haven't gotten them to the museum yet. There was a question about where we stand on 7 JP4s, and I know there is a bunch of them in that group. And as soon as we get them to Columbus and are able to test them, we'll put them on the website. So just watch the page on the website that has the list of the CRTs we have for sale. The big thing, of course, is the convention, May 5th, 6th, and 7th at the museum and at the Hilliard Arts Center, which is right next door. Format is very similar to last year, though it's a little bit, we've made some changes to deal with a problem we had with getting the stuff entered in the computer for the auction. I will mention we have one presentation lined up for the convention. We need one more. So if anybody out there has an idea for a presentation that they'd like to make, or knows somebody that would like to make a presentation, have them contact the museum and we will take a look at it.
I nominate Chuck Conrad.
Okay, well.
Gee, thanks. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. Thank you. Be careful what you ask for, too.
So that's about it. Any questions? Well, I guess not. Well, let's go to our the one item in the museum that we're going to talk a little bit about. Larry, are you listening? And Dave, can you put him on? There's Larry. Yeah. We fixed our problem with the Wi-Fi. Larry was on the wrong. We have two different access points in the museum, and he was on the wrong one. And we worked that out today. So we shouldn't have the issues we had last month. This is the Dynatron Ether Sovereign. It's a British set that we got several years ago. It was made about 1948. It has a 12-inch CRT. Dynatron was a company that was in the radio business going back into the 20s, and they were a top-end manufacturer. But I also read that they were pretty conservative. They didn't, in their radio line, they didn't switch to super heterodyne design for almost 10 years after it was developed, because they didn't think it was as good as the TRF. They made a couple of pre-war sets. I don't think there are any surviving examples, but there are two models. I think they're the same set of different cabinets that were made in 1939. Right after the war, they made a number of models. This was by far the most elaborate, and you can see it has a at that time only 78 RPM record changer. And the radio was a top of the line AM and shortwave radio, no FM at the time. And it had a really good high quality audio system. Now this set was sort of unique. It came from the office of the president of Dynatronic. I think they displayed it at the Radio Olympia in 1948. This is the set that was displayed. Then it went into their into the president's office, and it stayed there for some time. Now they were bought by Echo in the 50s, in the mid 50s. So I suspect that's when it left the company and went nobody knows where, until it became available 10 or 15 years ago, and we were able to get it. We don't know a lot about it. We have not opened it up to see what the circuitry is. I do know that it's TRF, single channel, as most of the British pre-war sets were. There were some exceptions. Someday we may get around to restoring it, but we've got a lot of sets we need to get around to restoring. So does anybody have any questions, or maybe if there's somebody out there that has more information on it?
That set that you have there, is that 100% original, or has that cabinet actually been refinished? That thing's just perfect.
That's 100% original.
Wow.
And I read also that this is probably the most expensive set made in the UK.
Dave?
So that's a 425 line television, I guess.
405.
Or 405, yeah.
Yes.
Steve, one thing I was wondering about is in the post-war collection of 405 line sets, have you ever come across a Band 3 converter?
I have seen them, and I think we have one somewhere. We have a bunch of British sets that we on display, and I think one of the sets that we got had one. And we don't have it on display, but it's somewhere at the museum.
Okay, I was just curious because I saw one in Steve Kissinger's collection out in California.
Right. Yeah, they were very common. They were in 1948. The British started broadcasting from London on a single channel. And that's why they were all just single channel sets originally. And then 2 or 3 years later, they opened a second station on their channel 3 in the north part of England. And from then on, the sets were built with they were built as super heterodynes from then on. But for the people that had the original sets, they sold that converter.
Yeah, that converter was for use on Band 3. For instance, when ITV started in London in 1955, they were up at 194 megahertz for the video.
We're talking about two different things here. I have not seen one of those. What I was talking about is really a single channel converter that allows you to use channel 1 and channel 3. But I didn't know about the band 3 converter.
Right.
I can add something to this as somebody who used to live in Britain at the time when I actually even used one of those converters. When they first brought those additional channels in the early 50s, they were all in band 1, so in the sort of range up to 65 megahertz, and there were channels 2 through 5. Typically, TVs were, as you said, changed. That the newer ones were had an IF. They were superhet. There were a few that were made that were fixed tuned to whatever channel. They were TRF on whichever other channel you happen to live in that area. The converters that I'm aware of, the ones that I used way back, were for converting band 3 after 1955 when they brought in independent television, and they would convert to your local band 1 channel. And the trouble with those was that, as we had when we used to live near to one of the powerful band 1 BBC channels, that when you switch the converter on, you're effectively putting a co-channel signal into your TV, and you would end up with a lot of herringbone patterning all over the screen when you were watching the independent channel. But I don't remember anything for converting from one particular band 1 channel to another band 1 channel. I think if you moved and you took a TV to another region that was TRF in the early 50s, you actually had to have somebody actually change the tuning of it for your local area. And that's what I remember of it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Now that set that you have there, it looks like it's in 3 separate parts there. Did they make just a TV only, or were they made to be additive, or do you bolt that together for shipping purposes?
I don't know. It came that way. So I don't think they made just the center part. I think it was all a unit.
Well, it's a beautiful piece of woodworking there.
It really is. Well, if there are no more comments or questions, why don't we move on to the main event? And how do you want to handle this, Dave?
Well, I'm going to try to be a little bit of a panel host or a master of ceremonies here. Not something that's particularly in my skill set, but we'll see how it goes. The guys have kind of gotten we have a little bit of an agenda to things to go go down a list here of things that they want to talk about. So we'll go down through that list, but they may want to bring in some other things, and we may want to digress. And by all means, again, we want to invite everybody who's here at the meeting to jump in with any questions or observations. I've been calling this barely controlled chaos. That's pretty much our goal for the evening here. So we'll see how that goes. I thought we should have promoted this. We should have named this the meeting about restoration philosophies, advice, warnings, heartwarming happenings, and horror stories, because I think we have a little bit of all of that coming in from the guys. So that'll be kind of interesting. I think the two main areas that are going to be covered tonight are restoration philosophies, different ways to do things, and I won't tell the story again, but I'm always charmed by the fact that we had a slight disagreement of opinion at one of our local antique radio club meetings, and it practically devolved into fisticuffs. So people can be pretty passionate about the right and wrong ways to do this stuff. That might just be taking it a little bit too far. And then the whole concept of looking at restoring televisions as a business, which a few people do, versus as a hobby, which is what most of us do. So with that, I guess if we could have our our three panelists, our mystery panelists, enter and sign in, please. Chuck, you want to sign in and say hi here?
Sure, why not? I guess you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I sound a little strange because as I told you, I'm sort of plugged up today. Yeah, I don't know what else to tell about what it is, but I've been doing repairs on my own stuff and customers, so to speak, for probably 30 some years now. Going through a lot of televisions and a lot of radios, a lot of test equipment and everything else. And I do have a certain way that I do my restorations. And to make the first part of this short is my only philosophy on all this work has always been, I don't ever want to see a customer's piece back on my bench again when it leaves here.
Chuck, where are you located?
I'm in Pennsylvania, little town Percy, Pennsylvania. I'm about 30 miles north of Philadelphia.
Okay, well, let's get the other guys introduced, then we'll get into the questions. So Dan, you want to say hi? Dan, do you have electricity or are you running on battery power?
No, I'm doing the Amish thing. I got a couple of old Coleman lanterns in the living room here, so hence the odd lighting. So apologies for that, but making do with what I got.
Zoom by candlelight. Wow, that's a novel approach. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you want to take a few seconds to introduce yourself to people who might not know you?
Yeah, I'm Dan Jones. I'm part of the ETF board, but I've been restoring TVs for about 10 years, a little bit longer. I kind of moonlight at Northern Audio Service in Madison Heights, Michigan, doing radio repair, other whatever jobs Mike has for me to do. But sometimes people will call and say, hey, I've got an old TV. Do you guys work on those? And he says, no, but we got a guy who does. So he gives them to me. And, you know, if I've got the time or I'm willing to take it on, I'll call the person and see what they've got and see what they want to do. But yeah, I'm located just outside the Detroit area. And
you're flanging out from low bandwidth. All right. Well, let's see if we can get Dan back on. But in the meantime,
and it's probably jammed here.
Okay. Bob, you want to jump in and say hi as our most well-known presenter after that spectacularly well-received meeting a while back.
Sure. Hi, I'm Bob Anderson. I'm in Chicago, Northwest Side. I've been tinkering with vintage TVs my whole life, but seriously for about 15, 20 years now. I have a full-time job as a programmer, so this is definitely a side gig. Started as a hobby. I didn't really plan on making it into a business or doing it for other people, but I started getting a lot of requests. Surprisingly, I apparently am the only one in this area that works on vintage TVs. And I started getting more and more people asking me. And I'm also on YouTube. I've been doing YouTube videos initially for my own projects, but people would see me and say, hey, I've got an old TV. I've been trying to find somebody for years to fix it. Can you help me out? They wore me down eventually. I have about 100 TVs of my own that I want to fix up. But I've been hounded so much, people begging me basically to fix their TVs, that I've relented. And I've been kind of going back and forth every other side, do one of mine, one of theirs. Most recently, I, for better or worse, decided to focus on predictives. And I've just finished about a dozen and I've got about 20 more to do. So about 2 years solidly booked of just predictive television.
A glutton for fun.
Yes.
All right. Well, I got a list of things that the guys went over with me ahead of time where we might go on this, but I'll just mention that maybe the genesis of this meeting or the spark behind it was a conversation that I had with Chuck at one point, where we were talking about how he has all of this fantastically, formerly fantastically expensive laboratory grade service equipment that he likes to use to work on the sets. And some people think that's a wonderful idea, and other people think that that's a terrible idea, maybe because they're jealous of him having all this fancy equipment, or for some reason there seems to be a philosophical argument that if you're going to work on the old sets, you should use the old equipment. So there's a bunch of issues related to different philosophies of restoring the sets. So maybe since I just name dropped there, Chuck, if you want to start, maybe talk about that a little bit, and then we can just sort of, everybody else can jump in as the conversation veers out of control during the meeting here.
Okay, if we want to get into that part of it. Yeah, I do use all my test equipment that I use for repairing is modern, meaning probably 1990s through 2000 HP Tektronix equipment, and a few other little odds and ends that I picked up. And I've started doing it also with vintage test equipment, but learned later that truthfully, you start spending too much time trying to keep your vintage equipment working correctly and not having really any idea of what the quality of it is. So basically I have, and for like, let's just take something that very few people like to do is sweep. For sweeping like IFs and whatnot. And there I've got probably 4 different sweep setups in here. HP Tektronix, and probably my most fancy one that I like to use is a little Japanese piece that was built for assembly line work. Set up 2 coax cables, hook it up, and everything, just program what you need into it and you sweep it, just that quick. Same thing with doing setups with waveform pieces. I use a modern Philips piece that has all the digitally generated test signals, stair steps, color bars, the whole 9 yards. And I use that for doing fine tuning also. But again, that's all the fancy stuff. And really what it boils down to is the 2 biggest pieces, the most common pieces that I use is a good VOM and a scope, a good scope that's capable of being triggered on vertical and horizontal sync signals, be it a modern, completely digital Rigol unit or a 500 series Tektronix scopes. Now, the only problem with, well, the Tektronix scopes are nice because they warm the basement down here. But either one of them work fine for doing that. And you don't really need most of the equipment, most of the tests, the real fancy equipment to do simple repairs. I'm one that, going off the other side, I'm one that doesn't believe in having to own the most modern tube tester there is. I have, again, I've got 3 or 4 different ones, from just general purpose ones up to TV tube analyzers to curve tracers. But really the only thing I use a tube checker for is to check a tube for shorts. That's it. As I've been told a number of times in the old days, the best piece of equipment for a tube is the piece of equipment that it's going into. If it works in there, that's where it stays.
Okay.
I'll leave that little part open.
No, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I like I said, I said my first little piece, so let's take it from there, Dave.
Yep. Yeah, we got a lot to cover. So Bob or Dan, you want to jump in and talk about service equipment?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I agree with everything you just said. And I have a very similar philosophy. And for all this, when I first got into the hobby, I thought it would be fun to have vintage test equipment and be back in the 50s, until I actually started using it and realized that it's not much fun. And as you say, even when maintaining it and knowing that it is working right and is accurate is just, it's not much fun. Especially when you don't have a lot of time. I want to just turn on a piece of equipment and work on my project, not have to let it warm up and calibrate it and all that. So yes, and I've also very recently was accused of not being competent because I did not have a wall of test equipment behind me, as some other guys do. And I've never understood that when you have guys that have 30 scopes and 30 RF generators. I have my favorite multimeter. I have my favorite RF generator, stuff that I use all day, every day, that I trust. I know how to use it. 4 or 5 pieces of test equipment will do 99% of what I need to do. Yeah, I also use a modern sweep generator, partial to a wave tech, that just because I happen to get a good deal on it, and it works great. Most of my stuff is also from the 90s. Oldest thing I have is a Tektronix. I think it's a 453 scope, just because it has wonderful bandwidth and really bright, crisp display. But even that, I don't need that much bandwidth to work on a TV. But yeah, I just have a handful of favorite equipment that I'm very familiar with, and that gets the job done, and that's what I go with.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there, because the same thing with mine. Basically, I have one stack of equipment that pretty much goes with doing certain pieces of work. Now on my bench, there's like 4 different benches here, but usually you're just sitting on one part of the bench, and it's got the meter that I use, the generator I use, and a scope that I use, and that's it. That's pretty much will cover, like you say, covers 99% of the stuff that comes in. And you get, you'll get a piece that's unusual that you really need some crazy ass piece of equipment. And as you go down, I go down to the bottom basement and go searching through stacks of it and find, oh, that's the piece that'll do it. And then haul it up. And like you say, put it on a bench, turn it on. Does it still work? It hasn't been used in, in 6-8 months. Okay, let's check that out. It's like, God, do I really need to do this? But, sometimes you do to get some of these crazy ass sets to work.
And testing tubes, that can be a whole, I agree with you, Kaboo. Test it for shorts and then put it in the sets if it works. But the guys who worry about the micro mows and matched tubes and all, and that, by the way, I don't work on amplifiers, audio equipment, for exactly that reason. I don't want to have to deal with the guys who want matched sets of tubes and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, I agree with you 100%. I basically go away from that kind of side. I do it, but I don't really like it, because you can never. Televisions, I found over the years, is not a real problem. Everybody seems to see the same thing. Okay, audio, put 10 people in the same room, play the same content, the same amplifier, everything's the same, and you'll get 10 different answers to whether or not it's a piece of shit or it's a fantastic piece. And you get these people in here and you do all the work, you bring it back to the spec that it called for, and they come in, oh, it doesn't sound right. Okay, so it's back to, what do you want to hear? I'll make it sound like you tell me. If you can tell me what you want, I'll make it sound that way. It won't be original anymore, but it'll sound the way you want it. And then they're happy. How can you do it? At least with the TV, they seem to all come up with the same thing. Yeah, it looks great, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. I've got a handful of equipment that I will use, a meter, oscilloscope, sometimes a VTVM if I'm trying to see, am I peaking a coil or whatever. But I had a friend visit who, he took one look at my bench. He says, so how much of that stuff do you actually use? And I said, maybe 1/5 of it I use regularly. The other stuff, I pull it down from the shelf maybe once a year because I have that one oddball thing I need it for. But when I got into the hobby, I was sort of a test equipment junkie. I was just buying the stuff because it was cool and oh, it's something else to fix up and that. But then, like you said, Bob, I like being able to turn it on, have a digital display to know I'm locked in at the frequency I want. I don't have to connect it to my signal counter and make sure I've got, because it's an analog display, that I'm on the right frequency, or wait the 15 minutes for it to warm up and stabilize. I like being able to turn it on and just go. So.
Okay. Dan, your picture is dark. Did you run out of whale oil or what?
No, I turned it off to try and save some of the bandwidth in here. So because it kicked me off and I got back on.
Yeah, I think that's what you needed to do. Sorry, we can't see your smile face.
I won't apologize for not breaking your computer monitors with my ugly mug. So.
All right. What about, again, in terms of the philosophies, what about checking capacitors and resistors versus replacing them? I think somebody mentioned US versus Chinese caps, film versus carbon comp resistors, that kind of stuff. Comments on that?
As far as I'll lead off again with it. As far as replacing it during a restoration, I have to go back to my original, point. I don't want to ever see this thing back on my bench, which means that everything gets replaced. As far as I won't say that everything, but 99% of the stuff changes. I'll go through and it gets recapped. That's all of it. Any resistor that's more than probably 20% out of range gets replaced. The ones you can't do anything with would be transformers, yokes, coils, and the like, unless they're already broken or shorted or burned open. And that's it. I just don't want to see them back, so I want them replaced. As far as which ones to buy, I've been using the good old yellow ones for years. Electrolytics have mostly been, Panasonic and the like, and stuff like that. And I've probably had less than 0.5% of bad ones out of the box. They just don't go bad. I don't test them before I put them in. It just takes up too much time to do it for the failure rate that I've seen in the last, years I've worked with them. And the other thing is to try to find one of the other problems I ran into with, and you guys probably did too, is you're working on a 7-inch set. It's packed chassis, and they're trying to jam orange drops in it. And it's like, holy shit! I look at the underneath the chassis, and it's like the caps are hanging all over the place because you can't put them back anywhere near where they were.
Yeah.
So the littler the cap, the better. Is what it, as long as they meet the spec, that's what goes into the thing, and that's what I use for them. Costs. I use the cost only because I do customer work, and no matter where you go, unless you really get into some of the real crazy capacitors that are online, some of the big houses, they're all within 10% of the price range. You can buy caps that cost you $50 a piece. I don't think I'd ever buy it, no matter if it was in the original piece of a test. This had to be in test equipment. The original test equipment piece had a $50 cap. I'll be damned if I'm going to put a $50 cap back in there. I'll just wait for it to burn up again and be done with it. So I see you shaking your head there too, Bob.
Oh yeah, no, again, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, that's what I say, Dave. I think you.
For some reason, I don't ever want to see anything come back.
Yeah, Dave. I think Dave picked 3 guys that go along with each other instead of getting the devil's advocate in there yet.
I like to think it's because we have experience doing this, and we've all reached the same conclusion for the same reason.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to get some dissenting opinions.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen some questions coming flying by, and I'd like to address some of those. So, reforming caps. The only time I ever leave old caps in or try to reform them is if it's mine, because I can keep an eye on it and I know what to look for, and I can jump in and turn it off. I just can't. I can't leave a 60-year-old capacitor and give it back to a customer because I don't want to deal with it.
I do have a question for the guys that are doing it. Do you carry, I started this years ago. Do you carry a insurance rider for your work that you do? In case you send worst case scenario, you send a Philco TV back out, Bob, and the guy plugs it in, and one of two things happens. One is the guy's an idiot. He electrocutes himself off of it. Number two is it shorts, burns down the house. You know damn well you're going to get called in on it because that's just the way people are anymore. So,
yeah. That's the big thing I worry about.
Yeah. So 25 years ago, I went out and bought a $1 million umbrella. It cost me, I don't know, $100 a year or something like that. It's just a rider on my insurance. I've never had to use it, but it's like, just one of those things. It's like, okay, well, I've never used most of my car insurance either, or my house insurance, but it's nice to know that if the house gets destroyed, it's going to be rebuilt. And I really don't need to see somebody knocking on my door and serving me with papers that I killed somebody. So what's the status on anybody else that does this kind of work?
I don't, but I should. When I started doing it, it was mostly for friends.
Yeah.
People who lived near me, and it was just a handshake and a verbal agreement. But I'm starting to do more and more paperwork, giving people breakdowns of the work that was done and all that. So that's something I thank you for bringing it up, because that's something I should definitely look into.
I see that some of the people here are saying no, and others are saying yes. But it's just my personal opinion. The cost of the insurance is so small that it just gets buried in with everything else. So, I haven't seen it, hasn't impacted any part of the repair business or my regular household business either. So I do it. So, but I see there's a couple of people here, yes and no's. So I guess it's the way it goes until you get burned.
I'll give you an example. I recently restored a 1948 RCA TV, an AT241. All it worked fine on all the original electrolytics. I just did it for fun, just to see what would happen. It works great. Later, I started taking them out. I tested them. They all test terrible, horrible leakage, even just 100 volts. So, yeah, it worked. If I was selling it, I could have told somebody, "Hey, restored it, works great." Reality is not for long, probably.
Yeah, well, what happens? I've had it happen to me where you do one of these sets, and one of the biggest things I get is people with pre-war TVs. Now, there's a lot of stuff in there that I can't replace because the stuff doesn't exist. Okay, CRTs in particular, a lot of the internals on those things, the caps, resistors, they can be replaced and no problem. But the first thing these people want to do is, this is going to be my daily viewer. Say, oh, no, it's not. You want to watch it, show it off for, an hour or something every few days. That's fine. But do not sit and turn it on like your home TV and leave it run. Something's going to fail.
Yeah.
I've had it happen to me too. I've also almost got my head knocked off with an exploding can capacitor one time. It went off and put a hole in my ceiling that I was in front of when it went off. So it's like, don't trust any of that stuff. No matter what people say, it goes. I don't mess with them at all either.
I saw some questions about restuffing.
Yep.
Now and then I will, if it's a rare set, if it's my own, just to do it and say that I've done it. I will not do it for a customer.
Well, I do it for customers if they're willing to pay $20 per capacitor. And I'll stuff the caps for them. And usually, I've only had 2 people so far. One was a TRK9, it was beautiful condition, and another a TRK12. Now my sets, my pre-wars, they're all restuffed. That's just because they were mine.
Sure.
I didn't really care, what it was. So, but
for me,
what's that?
Yeah, for me, I usually don't bother unless I don't physically have the room to put the caps underneath. And I've had, I think it was a Magnavox 12-inch chassis that it was packed in that area. So it had a cardboard top, so I could just pop the cardboard off, cut the can off, put the new caps in there, and then pop the the cardboard over it and hide it, and it worked fine.
Yeah, I'm talking doing the restuffing the paper caps inside those things too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And that's why I said very few people want to do it because
That's
like I
fun.
said,
Get out the
they
heat
had it,
gun and.
but I'm not doing it without charging because it takes to cut them out correctly so that you can reuse like some of the leads because you want to get perfect with it and all that good stuff. By the time you get done, you're into it for almost an hour per capacitor in the damn thing.
Sure.
So it's like it's just not worth my time to do it unless you're willing to pay for it. And that's what I do with them.
I make YouTube videos on my projects, and every time I do it, half the people tell me I'm an idiot and I'm wasting my time, and the other half say that's the way everything should be done, and good job.
Well, the problem is that if in the one of the old the old thing, if you've been around, you go through a lot of people. As soon as you unsolder a component, you've destroyed its originality. Period. So it's like in one philosophy, it's okay. Why would you bother restuffing them when you've already killed the originality of the thing? And I've done it in the past too. I've done some televisions that I wish I had never, actually never restored them, truthfully. And towards the end, the last few pre-wars that I bought, I never even bothered to restore them, mainly because I said, I already know what these things look like. Okay, I don't want to watch one of these 5-inchers. I don't want to watch another 12AP4 screen. I just leave it alone. I turn it on, make sure the CRT lights up for a few minutes, and that's it. It gets shut off again, and then up on the shelf it goes. And that's it. Early on, I used to restore every one of them that came through here. But and then they'd sit there for 3, 4, 5 years and never even turn them on again.
And back to your earlier point too about I like to use smaller parts as well. It kind of frees things up. You get better air circulation. You can see the wiring. You can see what's going on better. I think it makes them more reliable.
Oh yeah, if you can get the heat out of them, you definitely have a good chance of doing that, keeping things alive.
Along the lines of keeping it original with restuffing, resistors are kind of hard to track down.
Yeah, you can't really do it. I've in a couple of sets I've done early stuff again, and they had dog bones in them or something like that. I've taken resistors and hidden them underneath where the resistor is going to sit. So when you open it up and you really want to look, it's like you can't see them because they're on the other side of the resistor. Move the resistor, you can see there's a new one in there. But it was just okay.
I've gone so far as to put plumber's putty around modern resistors to make them and paint them to look like a dog bone. But when I was single, I don't have quite so much free time.
Yeah. So anyway,
and then one other briefly about restuffing caps. Just recently, I got somebody telling me about I'm going to kill myself because of all the cancer-causing agents that I've now released into my house, and I've just shortened the lifespan of all of my family members. And he was serious. He says he rebuilds amplifiers. He's a professional. He knows what he's talking about. He has a special hazmat dumpster where all the old caps come, and every month he pays a disposal fee.
Well, I don't know where
I started.
Yeah. For me anymore, I look at it this way. I've spent 3/4 of my life already doing it. The rest of it, it's not going to be any worse than I've already been through.
The cadmium, the lead, the asbestos. Yeah, we're still here.
I play with the asbestos. I just make sure it's soaking wet when I find a piece and pull it out. Cadmium, I'll wipe it down with something enough to keep the dust down. But there's not much else you can really do with this stuff. Unless you want to garb up, but then big deal. So you garbed up for it, but now you're turning this thing over to somebody else. Still got the dust on it.
I've noticed more and more guys are wearing gloves when they work on this stuff.
Yeah.
I can't.
I can't either. Don't feel bad. I can't work with
that. Drives me crazy.
I need the dexterity of my fingers. I hate wearing gloves. Yep.
But I get a lot of comments about that, the toxicity, and you should be wearing gloves. No.
Oh, hell,
sorry.
What we touch in everyday life,
right?
I'm not worried about
me neither.
TV or a radio.
So, Chuck, you started to allude to this. You're talking about you don't ever want to see a set come back to you. Let's talk for a minute about repair versus restoration. And the reason I thought of this is that there is a fella here in New Jersey, an old repair guy who does repairs. And he'll repair any TV for $100. He's got a flat rate price for to repair a TV. But when you bring your TV into him, he finds the capacitor that failed, snips it out, puts a new one in, and gives you your TV back in working condition. That just doesn't seem to be a real great philosophy on a 60 or 70-year-old set. But where do you draw the line? Like you said, you'll test the resistors. Where do we draw the line between what constitutes a full restoration? How far would you go towards doing a budget job maybe versus somebody for whom price is no object, et cetera, et cetera?
Basically ask the customer. I've gone the same thing. When they bring it in here, my whole model is a restoration. Okay, just what I told you. All the caps get changed out. Resistors over a certain number. And usually it's, like I said, it's 20% I use as a limit for the first time through them. Now again, 20% some circuits is out of whack. And you'll find that out when you go test the set and make sure it's going to work. Tubes, shorted tubes, they get replaced. Tubes that check sort of weak, I put them back in. If the set under testing, you find, there's not enough gain here or not enough color there or whatever, then you change the tubes out to do that. Then I do have some people that just want it working, and there I just basically go along with us. If all you want me to do is fix it, I'll just fix it. But this is, you run the risk of it's going to fail in a week, in a month, it's going to go. And there's some that I've just said no, what they want done was just not worth the aggravation of having it come back to me, or, an idiot just saying, oh yeah, well, it's your fault. You were the last one that worked on it. You've got to fix it. Even though it's some completely isolated piece that burned out, it's still your fault.
Right. Well, Dan was making some comments about, managing customer expectations. So maybe a time we can jump into that. I recall back when I was a kid, even when the sets were brand new or were just 2 or 3 years old, the TV repair guy would fix it. And, then a month later, it was broken again. And, that was just how things rolled. So Dan, you want to jump into that since you brought that up?
Yeah. I used to always refer to the Radiola guy's website. I don't know if it's back up or not, but he used to have a page or two about operating a vintage television set in the modern world. And I would direct people to that and said, here's why the sound isn't what you're expecting, or here's why you're seeing little weird things in the picture, stuff like that. Like he brings up the point, there's so much stuff crammed into broadcast signals now, closed captioning, channel information, blah, blah, blah. And they managed to cram all that into the, the waveform for the carrier. But these old sets weren't designed to handle that extra information in the signal, so they don't know what to do with it. So it shows up as interference or something weird on the screen. So there's that. And then, like you say, the frequency of when these things would break down, and hey, there's certain parts in here that are essentially unobtainium. So if you keep running the set, they have a finite life. So I'll lead off with those thoughts, but I'm sure the other guys have some other perspectives as well.
Yeah, I try to set customers' expectations right up front and say, hey, I will do XYZ, replace the caps, check the tubes. Tubes I kind of go back and forth on. Lately, I've just been putting in all new tubes just because I have a good supply now and I don't want to deal with it. But I keep all the used tubes. Sometimes I'll give them to the owner and say, hey, generally with the caps too, I save everything, I clip out, I give them a bag and say, hey, Here's the history of your set, but I tell them, hey, the only guarantee I can give you is when you pick it up, it's working. And here's what I did. Generally, I haven't had sets come back. It will probably keep working for a while. I tell people use it sparingly, not, like you said, not don't leave it playing all day, every day. And so far that's worked out pretty well. And everybody has been very understanding. I said, yeah, I understand. Yeah, I know there are no guarantees at 70 years old. And so far I haven't had any trouble with people being upset that say, hey, it's 5 years later and it's not working anymore. And you said it would work forever. Hopefully things will keep going that way.
Yeah, I don't really give them a warranty on time limits. It's just that I warrant the work that I did and the parts that I replaced.
Yeah.
If it's something other than that, it's like you brought it into me fresh.
But
And
they have no idea.
I give them an itemized bill when they pick it up. It's itemized for every resistor, every capacitor, and usually everything that I've done in the set as part of the the bill. And then so there's no question then, because I've got a copy of it. They have a copy of it. If he comes back a year later, says it stopped working, and I go into it and find, this other transformer burned out because of some crazy thing. It's like I can't help that. If the capacitor I put in shorted out and burnt the transformer out, then yeah, okay, I will make good on it. And most of that is just, the old, good business again. What you're looking for is the guy's likely to bring your name up when he says, oh, I got somebody that does the work for you that'll do it and stuff like that. So it costs a few bucks maybe, but it's not been a killer. When it gets to that point, I'll stop doing it, period.
Does
So
anybody
you
have a
talk
deal
about
with
a good
customers
business.
monkeying around in the set and trying to fix it?
Yeah. Yeah, that voids everything. That's just the same way as everybody else.
Like with some of my really prized televisions I'm not going to restore them or start replacing capacitors, because I look at it like this. It's mine for the next, say, 30, 40 years or so, and then it'll belong to someone else, and it's going to just keep getting handed on down to different people. And eventually there'll come a time when these sets will not be able to function no matter what, because of, windings breaking down and transformers, picture tubes, availability. So I look at it like this. The future generations that are going to appreciate these at the point where they're no longer functional are going to say, look, I got a set full of new parts. I think that the set that's been unmolested and unrestored will be more valuable and more collectible 100 years from now than the one that's been restored.
I agree with you 100%. That's always been a story for 25 years, is you get the people that say the same thing. Why are you going to restore it? It's going to be worth more money if it's not been touched. And it's like, yeah, okay, I believe it on some sets. I don't have a problem with some TVs, some radios. You're better off leaving it alone. Just use it, as I call them, a shelf queen. It shows the period, everything is there. But what do you do with a common radio or TV? They made 100,000 of them.
Fix it up and use it.
What's that?
Fix it up and use it,
Yeah, but so I say you can fix that up, but at some point it's like, yeah, is it worth even fixing them? I get sets in that really, truthfully, one of my favorite customers is the one that comes in. It's a family heirloom. Those people are fantastic. They don't care what it costs, what you have to do, just fix it. I've had things come in. I just had a console radio shipped from Hawaii to me. I tried to talk this woman out of it for days. She just absolutely said, no, I want you to restore it. It's like, can you imagine what it's going to cost to ship it to me? I said, nobody in the West Coast? Nope. And nobody in Hawaii? Nope. So I said, fine, ship it. I said, I'll get it done. It'll probably be, maybe this spring it'll be finished. But that's just the way it is. I've had a few of them from the West Coast. Luckily, no televisions from the West Coast. That one there, I don't even want to ship them back. So that's my biggest reason for me to not take them, is because I don't want to ship them.
That's a good topic, by the way. Generally, I say, if you want me to fix it, you have to bring it to my front door for televisions.
Yeah.
A couple people broke me down and they pulled the chassis out and shipped it to me. Now, shipping is a hassle. I mean, in and of itself is a hassle, but they have to then, when they get it back, they have to reassemble it and connect everything back up right and adjust it right.
Yeah,
I don't trust them to know how to do it.
Some people you can't do it with. I've one regular customer in Alabama, and he's into pre-war stuff, so he's okay. He can plug everything back together again when I send him. But the problem was, shipping the thing. I got to build a wooden crate to ship this thing and make sure that it gets back to him okay.
Right.
And the cost on it, I think the cost of the TRK 12 chassis was, God, over $100 and some for that. The power supply was even worse.
Yeah,
doing it. And then the wood and the bolts and everything else to put it all together. I did have a guy one time shipped me a 1F5. Pre-war Andrea 1F5.
Oh yeah.
Okay, from Washington up to here. And he crated this thing up. It was a beautiful job, to do it. And again, it was one of these jobs that's money was no object. He didn't really care. He just wanted it completely redone. So the cabinet was more money than my restoration fee. That's
wow.
I mean, a lot more. But that's the way they go with it. It's just sometimes it's just funny to talk to these people. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. If they could deliver it, I much prefer deliver it and pick it up, because I don't really like the idea of repacking them. A lot of times the packing they ship it in, it didn't survive. It barely survived the first trip.
Right.
Unless they do crate them, but that's rare. So.
And speaking of rare, as far as I know, we are very rare people. I mean, in terms of people that actually fix up old TVs.
Yeah.
I think there were only, I don't know, a dozen of us in this country.
Yeah, there's not many that do any kind of good repair work on early stuff, period. I'll tell you, it's I've seen some work by people. People brought me some stuff, and it's like, where'd you find this guy? Wires parts are connected together, flying in underneath the chassis. They, and then the ones that they glue them inside, they're hot glued inside the chassis.
I think we've all seen too many of those. I mean, it wasn't a TV per se, but I've seen in radios a lot of that. Somebody had brought one in Northern, said, "Oh yeah, I bought it from this repair shop, and they said it works, but you guys go through it." And of course, they had their big sticker slapped on the back with their phone number and everything. And I open it up, and there's some inductors in the filament string to keep the AC interference down while they were open, so they just soldered jumpers across them. There was they grafted some kind of pilot light in there with this huge dropper resistor that was just flopping around in the breeze. And it's like, guys, that bulb is still available readily. Why did you go through all this trouble to put this contraption together to do it? And I mean, there must have been 3 or 4 other things in there. And there's old original paper caps in there and stuff. I thought, man, if this was me, I wouldn't let this out my front door with my name plastered all over it. But I've taken apart other radios and seen all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm sure we all have at one point.
Yeah, that's one of the big reasons why I started doing this for other folks. Is I was contacted by one guy in particular. He had gone to 2 other repair shops and spent hundreds of dollars over several years trying to get just a basic Admiral TV working. And he came to me out of desperation, and I said, "Fine, just bring it to me." And they had hardly done anything. And they told him that it couldn't be fixed. It turned out to be a width coil that needed to get replaced. I didn't even charge him because I felt bad for the guy. He had spent something like $500 to fix just a basic run-of-the-mill Admiral TV. And it was a family heirloom. That's all he wanted was his one black and white old TV to work. And I've seen that before, because I've gotten Or I've been given sets that they said it just can't be fixed if you want it for parts, and they handed me the inventory, and I was shocked at what they were charged for basically having no work done. For example, a picture tube evaluation, $50.
Yeah.
Which means they just hooked up to a CRT tester, if they even did
that.
Jeez.
It took me 5 minutes to get the set working. And he said it was a set that they couldn't be fixed, and he'd spent hundreds of dollars trying to.
Anybody?
Basically,
I had an interesting one. Oh, sorry, Dave.
No, go ahead. Go. You're the panel. Go right ahead.
No, this kind of plays in, with the museum and everything. And I know Bob's heard me tell this story before, but there was a person there at one of the conventions a few years back. She was there with her son because her son was really interested in televisions, and he had a little 7-inch electrostatic Admiral. And she had taken it to a local shop, and they got it working, which is a fairly loose term for some people. But she said, yeah, you turn it on, and within 5 minutes, the picture starts to collapse and other bad things happen. She said, could you look at it? And she had brought it with her. And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to look at it. And, by luck, a couple weeks later, I'd be going right by where they lived in Indiana for work. So I said, I can take it and go through it. And when I opened the thing up, there's maybe 3 resistors that had been replaced, a couple of electrolytics, and that was it. I mean, even the big 6,000 volt coupling caps for the deflection plates were still the originals.
Wow.
So it was no surprise that it was behaving like that. But so went through all the caps, checked the resistors, did all that stuff, got the set working pretty well, but the vertical wouldn't lock. So I kept going through it, and I'm checking all these parts. And it's like, I've gone through everything in the vertical section. What the heck could be going on? And there was this huge domino cap in there, and micas typically don't go bad. But when I was reading in the parts list, it was originally specified as a paper capacitor, and looking closer, it looked like it had just been tacked in by some repairman. I don't know how many decades ago. And I thought, well, what are the chances? I'll pop it out and put a new film cap in there, and bam, vertical locked in. Sound was great. That was the final piece. So even things that you think are going to be, okay, you still got to check. And
Never
know what you're
believe in
looking at.
those. Never believe that a mica cap is good either.
Yeah, especially
Save
in
yourself the
elemental.
aggravation. They're bad. Most modern films are almost as good as the micas from 65, 70 years ago. I mean, you got to be, I wouldn't replace a mica that was in a tuned circuit, an oscillator or something like that with a film. But any other place that there was a mica cap, I don't even bother with them anymore. Just put a film in it and it works. I rebuilt, just to give you an idea about, everybody says about, one thing I get a kick out of is listening. And I don't know how many of you listening even run into this, but one of the things I see is people asking for, where can I buy a 0.013 cap? Because that's what this one required. It's like, you cringe because it's like, put an 01 in it, put an 015 in it. I rebuilt a radio one day with all 0.03 caps in it, except for the filters, of course. But every coupling cap, every bypass cap in it was a 0.03. Radio worked like a charm. And basically it boils down to, the engineer designs a thing. The bean counter looks at it and says, we don't have those and we're not going to buy them. I have 100,000 of these. This is what you're going to put into it.
Yeah.
And you end up.
Well, and also, you also think about the tolerances of the parts compared to then versus now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, someone's like, well, I got a 50 microfarad filter. I can't put a 47 in there. Well, yeah, but if you look at 20% of 50, and then the 10% of a modern one, you're still falling within that tolerance range. So
Look,
you really
ever look
don't
at
have anything to worry about.
You ever look at the specs on a can cap? They're plus 100, minus 50%.
Right? Like terrible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like put anything you want into it. It's like
Right.
whatever I see laying around, if the voltage is bigger or equal, and that's what I've got on my bench, that's what goes into the thing. I mean,
Yep.
you don't have a problem with them. Don't put them, you know, the old adage used to be never double the cap or half the cap. But, you know, and I think it's probably a good run of the mill rule to go with, just to keep it safe. But again, it's like the tolerances, like, you know, whoever was saying about it, tolerances anymore are crazy. What used to be precision today is normal.
Yeah, I cringe when I see guys on various online forums and they're stuck on some problem where they have no image or something, and they say, well, I better go through and check all the resistors and make sure they're all within 5%. Like, dude, when you have a major problem, like you don't have a raster or something, it's not going to be because the resistor is 10% off. It's you have a major problem.
Yeah.
You have a bad connection. You have, anyways.
Yeah, I've seen one,
Oh, hey,
one unit
before I
came in
forget.
one time. The guy put all 1% resistors in.
And it goes back to that about
Jeez.
matching tube characteristics and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
These,
Well,
these
it wouldn't have
circuits
been
were
any
designed
worse.
with huge
Yeah.
tolerance range.
And you get the audio amps, the same thing happens to those when you see those. I've seen those, same thing. The guy puts 1% resistors in. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's still not going to make it sound any better.
How about outside foil on a capacitor?
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Something I get
That's
asked
too.
about.
I don't, sorry, I know it's there and I know it has some bases, but I've never had a problem putting one in backwards, so to speak.
No, me
Quote
neither.
backwards.
I will. There
In a
are
very
a few
high
topics,
gain-
stuff we've talked about.
In a very high gain preamp stage, I could see where you might have an issue with it. But I've never seen that big of a high gain stage outside of a piece of instrument.
Exactly, and that's
That
been my
needs-
philosophy too. If it's something that's that sensitive, it's probably going to be in a shielded box.
Yeah, that too, exactly.
I may do a YouTube video on this topic at some point, knowing that it's going to elicit a lot of response.
Oh,
just
yeah.
because certain people there are certain other YouTubers who have many, many followers, and they say something that's just taken as gospel, like outside foil matters, and then everybody just says, "Oh, I guess it matters," and I get asked that all the time, especially if I'm troubleshooting something. But you make sure you put your caps in the right way. Matter,
Yeah.
but so and so says it does matter. I don't care.
You haven't gotten enough hate mail, Bob, I guess, eh? You need to get some more.
See, the good thing about me, I don't even get on that shit anymore. I give up. I don't. It's just like I don't really want to hear it.
Yeah.
Something like this
Yeah.
isn't so bad. Dave talked me into doing this, but I'm thinking, and here I'm dealing with, you know, guys that basically know what they're doing, hopefully. But you get out on those freelance forums, it's God only knows, and you got just the people that just want to irritate and start a flaming everybody. So I don't mind. If you want some information, I'll be glad to talk to you one-on-one. Is where it goes to, and that's it.
Let me ask you a question here. I heard comments ranging from Bob fixed the set for free for somebody that had already put too much money into it, to Chuck has had people come to him and basically it was how much you got, and everything in between. This can be a kind of a third rail topic, but does anybody want to talk about what is a reasonable fair and reasonable charges for different levels of service, and what do you do if a set comes in and it's way worse than you thought it was before you quoted a price to somebody?
I never quoted price. That's, you know, I give it a range by going back. What I'll do is I'll go back into my billing software and I'll pull invoices for the closest TV or radio, whatever, over the past few years, and I'll take an average of what that costs. That's the number I give them. With, you know, I'm not being held by it, but there's a rough idea where it is. It could come in under, it could come up a lot. And you always have the same thing. This is all based on standard replacements. Power transformers, no, that's out off the books, because if I have to have one made, I know it's going to be $200 to have one made. Picture tubes, God only knows, especially if you're dealing with pre-wars, you could be out $3,000-4,000 for a pre-war picture tube if you can find one. All that kind of stuff. So it's, there's a standard, at least in my case, there's a standard repair work that's done that I can give you a rough idea what it is. And that's how I leave it. If and basically in my, so sorry to say it this way, but what I end up with is, you called me, I'm giving you a price. If you don't like it, go find somebody else to do it. I don't need it. That's the main thing, is this isn't my livelihood. It's.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, is I think we're all in the same boat where it's not our main source of income. And we have the ability to turn people away. And I do. I've had people who want to flip a set and they want me to do, just make it work.
Just make it work. Yeah.
I said, no, this is what I do. This is what it will cost. Yes or no.
I'll make it work for you. If you know those people, it's okay. What's the restore? $400. I'll get it working for $400. But
by the way, since you threw that number out, that is my base charge. I've been getting more and more to itemizing. Yeah, of course, if it's a picture tube or anything like that, then it's going to be significantly more. But that is about what my base estimate is for getting a TV to worth $400.
That's for me. And, I just kind of use a flat rate for, okay, basic rebuild. This is what it's going to take. And then, I always have the caveat, if it needs a flyback or a picture tube or some oddball part, then, we got to come back to the table and talk more.
Hey, speaking of
question,
show and tell time, you guys can see this. I don't know if it's backwards or not.
Yeah.
The 1952 price list for picture tubes. Multiply those values by 30 to adjust for inflation. To get some idea. The 7JP4 1952 is $25. That would be $750 in today's money. TVs were really expensive back then. Tubes were really expensive. Just to give some idea. So picture tubes. Yeah. I mean, people say they're expensive now, but actually they're cheaper now than they were back then if you adjust for inflation.
So now we know why they sold so many brighteners back then.
Exactly. And why people spend money to get them rebuilt.
Yep.
So Dan, you were also talking a little bit about customers who had not necessarily unrealistic expectations, but unreasonable fears, fear of X-ray.
Oh, yeah.
Or the people who think it just needs a tube, just change the tube, and
that one you're going to hear in any hobby. Oh, it just needs a tube, or if it's an old record player, it probably just needs a needle or a idler wheel, and it'll be fine. No. But there is that stigma of old televisions. Like I'll tell people I've worked on them, and oh man, you didn't get killed by the radiation off of that. And that's, guys, I start to explain some of the physics of it. It's like a black and white set. It's not generating enough, anode voltage to pull the electrons fast enough to have them give off radiation when they hit something. And a black and white TV, there's no shadow mask for them to hit. So, everyone likes to mention the famous GE sets in the late 60s that, we're recalling the shunt regulator tubes because the circuit had a problem with it. Yeah, but you had to be sitting at just the right spot by the TV, a certain distance away to even get any soft X-ray exposure to it. So, there's that perception. Some people, I've had people ask me, are you going to put all new tubes in it? And I said, well, I can if you want to, but they're asking because their perception is tubes go bad just from sitting. And usually that's not the case. I mean, if their vacuum is intact and the envelope hasn't been damaged, then they should be okay. I'll go through and I'll test them to make sure that the filaments aren't open or things like that. But as was said earlier, the set's the best teacher, or I should say the best tester, because a teaching experience I had from that, I was doing a Sylvania Halo light for a lady. It was her dad's TV. He even had a plaque with his name on the top of it. So I think he worked for Sylvania, and I don't know if they gave that to him as a retirement gift or what, but it had value to her. So I go through, I'm testing the tubes, and the vertical output tube tested marginal. So I got a replacement, put it in there, get the set up and running. And the vertical is maybe only going 3/4 of the height of the CRT. And I've got the linearity turned all the way up, the height turned all the way up, and it is just really lacking. So I go in and I'm checking all the tube voltages, and everything's dead on where it should be. And I thought, well, what the heck? Let's put this other tube back in. And I put the original quote unquote weak tube in there, and now I had tons of raster. I'm having to dial everything back to pull the picture back into its into the mask there. And that's when I learned that Raytheons were junk tubes. But yeah, it worked fine in that set. So it's for tube replacement, it's kind of a tightrope walk, because in some cases, critical circuits, you want them new. So again, you don't want the thing coming back. But at the same time, if the tube is working well in the set, I don't see a need to replace it. I'm trying to think of other misconceptions people have had. I don't know. Did I list any other ones in that note to you, Dave?
Well, yeah, you had talked about, I guess you had started to touch on maybe people who will take a set and hook it up to an antenna and then.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah,
or conversely, the people who seem to have all the answers, and they say, "Oh yeah, these sets will never work again. There's no way you can make them work again."
Yeah, that's the one I forgot. The with the whole digital changeover, people thought, "Oh well, my TV's obsolete now. I got to throw it away because it'll never work again with broadcast." No, you get a converter box and put it on there. That could lead to its own discussion, because some converter boxes are better than others. I had one that was one of the freebies with the coupon from the FCC when they changed over, and I would get terrible buzzing problems in the audio, and it turned out it was the converter box. I got a much better, higher end one, and I never had nearly the problems with it. So I usually give people advice as to what one they should try to buy for using with their set. But I mean, sometimes it even just comes down to people, again, because they don't know. They'll look at the back of the TV and they'll see the screw terminals for the antenna and say, well, I can't connect a coax to it. Well, yeah, you get a matching transformer. I mean, to us, it's trivial, but to them, they don't know. So yeah, you come across some interesting arguments from people, either just because they're misinformed, or somebody put something in their head that they, like you say, oh, somebody said this, so it's gospel. Not necessarily.
One I hear now and then is about they will burn your house down, or they overheat, and I see people go so far as to cut a hole in the back of sets and put fans inside of them.
Oh yeah,
especially with the predictors, which
well,
tubes get hot. I mean, if you're not,
if
you haven't seen tubes before, you might be thrown off by how much heat they kick out. That's their normal operation.
But another thing too is, the parts that we're using to rebuild these sets, the temperature ratings are higher now. I mean, I think what the average for most electrolytics or regular caps is around 105 C, and most of these sets, when they were new, 85 C was considered the high end. We put in film resistors that don't drift with temperature. There's, you rebuild a Predicta now with modern parts, you can turn that thing on. You never have to futz with the horizontal hold, the vertical hold. It'll lock right in. I had a guy that I restored one for, and he says, "Man, this thing is great," because it had worked. Somebody had done some restoration work on it when he got it, and he was a TV collector. So again, like you said, Bob, you kind of know what to watch for when you have the understanding that you've got a bunch of original parts in there. But he says, "Man, this is great. I don't have to get up 3 or 4 times to fix the hole in that during the course of my program." And so, yeah,
It
some
is
things have come a
satisfying to
long
see
way.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we've covered most of the things on the list that I had here. If anybody has any other questions, or if any of you three guys have anything that you want to jump in at. I know, Bob, you were talking about all the annoying people on YouTube. I sensed that there were some stories there. But then, when that well dries up, there were a lot of questions on the chat. So people should jump in with those questions maybe at some point soon, and maybe we can get some answers to them too.
Yeah, I mean, you go on any social media, you're opening yourself up to criticism. So whether it's a forum or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, I got a thick skin early on, and I've started out some videos many times, or at least I used to, and saying like, I don't have all the answers. There's more than one way to do it. That you said restoration versus repair, whatever. This is what I am going to do for this project because I choose to. And then I still get comments, that's why are you doing it that way, or wasting your time, or you should have done this or should have done that.
You got a pretty friendly
crowd. I should ignore them, but sometimes I get into it. And I know better, but sometimes it's just hard to ignore the comments and things.
I said you got a friendly crowd here tonight, so count your blessings.
Yeah, which is refreshing. Getting in arguments online never leads to anything productive. You're never going to change anybody's mind.
No.
It usually devolves into personal insults at some point. So just avoid it if you can.
You know,
I did a presentation at the ETF last year. I ended it by saying that just have fun, and I'll say the same thing about this. Just do what you think is satisfying to you and makes your customers happy, and just keep on keeping on.
A rather common question that I'm asked from visitors that look at my collection, they always seem to ask, do all of these sets work? And I say, well, I have at least 120 sets in my collection. And I just tell them the same thing. I said, I do have a few representative sets. I said, but what's the point in making them all work? Because I can't watch them all or test them all. It would take too long. And plus the fact, that once you fix them, you come back a year, 2 years later, and there's something wrong with them all over again. And all of that. Well, some of you that do know me, I have, for you Predicta guys, I have 2 Philco Predicta sets, brand new in the box, never opened. One's a G4242 and the other one's a 17er. But in the 42 there, I cut a little window down in the corner of the set and shined a flashlight up in it just to see what it looked like. Kind of interesting though, but I've thought about opening up one of the boxes as a ceremony or something, but I'm not quite sure how to do that. But what do you guys think I should do with it?
Wow, that's a tough one. It was exciting a few months ago. Somebody found just an empty box from a 17er, and we were all in awe. But it didn't actually have a set inside of it that never been opened. It's such a rare thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems like it shouldn't stay in the box forever because then it doesn't do anybody any good. But then again, it's only original once.
In some cases, for those of us that weren't alive when these sets were brand new, it would be helpful to look at, okay, this is how it came from the factory. This is how the lead dress should be, things like that. So on one hand, it would be a great learning tool, a time capsule per se. But again, the factory, Philco wasn't around anymore. They sealed the box. So We actually, the shop I help out at, they used to sell Philco Predictas back in the day. And, somebody had brought in, they called up the guy and said, "Hey, I've got this TV with your card in it for your business, and can I bring it in?" And the guy, I guess his grandfather had bought it as a gift anniversary present for his wife, and he had it all wrapped up and hid away behind the clothes or something in the closet. And tragically, he passed away before he could give it to her, and it was hidden away in the house, and it sat there for decades. And when the son or whoever it was inherited it, he's going through cleaning out, and he sees this box all wrapped up with the shop's card in the top. And so they brought it in, and they actually opened it up, and he said, "God, I wish I'd taken a video of this," because no one would believe it, pretty much. But they actually got it out of the box, they plugged it in, and it worked, even though it sat in the box for decades. They were just amazed. So that's, I don't know if that gives any kind of perspective, but for the one rare instance where that's happened and someone actually did open it, that's a story I can share.
There's a news item I'm going to read to you guys that sort of has some bearing on this from just a few days ago, Monday, February 20th. Sealed original iPhone sells for over $63,000 at auction. It got the plastic shrink wrap on it, and apparently, it's just to paraphrase here, it says the owner was given it as a gift by friends in 2007, but never used it because she had another phone. And she just left it unopened for 15 years. And I guess the thing is, if she ever opens it, it's probably worth a lot. Well, whoever bought it, if ever opens it, it's probably worth a lot less than $63,000.
That is crazy.
The guy that I bought these sets from, he had also a Philco Predicta Princess that was new in the box, but he had opened it, and he had it out on display, and the thing worked perfectly, it seemed like. I just wish I'd bought it as well, but at the time I wasn't thinking in that direction. I just liked the Predictas themselves.
I bought years ago, I bought a Stromberg Carlson new in the box also. It had been sealed up. It was a 1949. I don't remember the model, but I opened it up because I just wanted to see what it looks like. Something that hadn't been in the atmosphere. And, I probably shouldn't have done it either, but it was just amazing to see a TV chassis that still shined. You could see yourself in the damn thing. And cabinet, the cabinet was actually no alligatoring on it, pristine everything. So I did save all the packing and everything, packed it all up and put it all back together again. And I ended up giving it away to a friend of mine that collects that stuff also. So I gave it to him as a gift. So now it sits somewhere in his collection on a shelf.
We didn't touch on
a 7.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't touch on this topic, and I know it's getting late. Don't want to send us down a rabbit hole, but when I'm restoring, repairing a quote unquote antique television, as much as I want the RF and the IF to all get, swept and tuned and have everything work right, while I'm in there, if it's a set that has a transformer based power supply, I pretty much always put a RCA jacks on the set for direct video input and direct audio input, so you could hook up a DVD player to it, because they don't have modulators and don't want to have to use a modulator, and really don't want to have to worry about all those RF and IF tubes. And you can play a DVD and just go in with, your red and white and yellow jacks. You just mono the left and right together, and you just give them the video input right after the video detector, before the video amplifier, so you get all your sync, and it works great. But that's probably blasphemy to some people on the call.
Not really. I've done it a number of times. In particular, some people, that's the way they want them, and other times it's just the fact that we all know 1948 and 49 RCA tuners are pieces of shit.
Exactly.
The wafers are gone, so sometimes it's the only way to get one of those sets working again. So there's really no
Generally, I
problem with
don't,
doing
but I
it.
can understand why you would, because the few times I have, the picture and sound is spectacular. But most of my customers want the charm of fiddling around with the dial and the
tuners,
picture
yeah.
not being quite right. It's kind of a weird thing too. Most of the people I've done work for, they're older folks and they don't expect the set to work perfectly. They want to kind of fiddle with the knobs and have to tune for the charm of it, the nostalgia of it, if you follow me.
Yep.
So I generally don't put the jacks in.
Yeah,
was
that,
it?
Bob,
I'm
that kind of brings up, you know, what I was alluding to earlier about people, what they expect out of it. I mean, when I first got into the hobby, you know, I got the TV working pretty well, but you know, there's something kind of funny looking in the picture with that. And then I'm on the forums asking guys, hey, what's wrong with the set? And nothing. That's the way they were. You know, but I didn't grow up with them. I didn't know any better. I mean,
Barkhausen lines.
yeah, you look at a modern TV, and you know, there's on, off, volume, and channel. That's all you need. But you know, my Admiral 30A1 has, you know, what, 8 knobs in the front, another 10 in the back, and all that. And people see that and like, good God, how do you even get a picture in on that thing? It's like, well, just what you did.
Yeah, that was a similar experience for me. When I first started fixing these, I didn't know what to expect because I'm not old enough to. I always had color TV. I always had solid state TV. I'm 53 years old. So I thought if I got any picture that, hey, that's just how good it got, until I saw like an RCA 630 TS with full 4.5 megahertz bandwidth fully set up right. Like, oh, wow. Okay. You can actually get a really, really good image on these sets. Generally, then they get into the later sets and they start cutting corners and not quite so good.
Actually, if you, it was surprising me, hell out of me, a friend gave me a Philco 7-inch. And everybody always says they're terrible, you know, pictures, the bandwidth shit. I spent basically a full day realigning the thing for them, redoing the whole thing. I have pictures of the swept response and everything else, but this damn thing just blew my mind when I got done with it, because the video bandwidth was out at over 4 meg. When you put a display on it, you can, it's like, man, this is something else. I don't think I've seen, you know, since looking at a 630, you know, you expect it, you never expect it on a 7-inch 7JP4 set. And this thing was so crisp and clean. It was like, and I gave it back to him, he goes, this is my same TV. But yeah, I said, yes, it is. But again, you would believe what I had to do to make it do that. You know, it was basically a full realignment. And I spent hours on it. And basically my original job was sweeping wide bandwidth RF amplifiers, you know, 200 to 800 megahertz stuff. So, and it's basically more of an art than it is, you know, you sit there and read the book, you know, even on a TV, and it says, oh, adjust this, this, and this. And realistically, those things are so interconnected that you adjust this one over here, this one gets screwed up. And you just sit there and you move, okay, this one moves a little, this moves a little, back and forth, and then all of a sudden, one final adjustment and everything falls into place with the thing. So you can get these TVs to look beautiful if you got the time and truthfully, the equipment to do it. I mean, you never get that with you know, a B&K unit, any of those other things from the 40s and 50s, it'll never work. It just doesn't have the capability to see what the full capability is of some of these things. And like I said, you're right, the 630, I mean, you get that on some good test equipment to get it done right, and they are fantastic. They go right out to that sound carrier, and then they're gone after that.
Talking about originality, I did a ham fest this morning in Dalton, Georgia, and I picked up something rather interesting. It's a 1952 Popular Mechanics magazine for 75 cents, and it's talking about all about television and Here's the book that makes you a TV expert, and it's a manual, and it's a manual for the homeowner and repairman. And it talks about how to buy a TV set, antennas and stuff like that, how it works, and how to make your own TV repairs from 1952. I thought that was rather novel, you know, and something else I can't wait to go through it and see if it teaches me anything.
Well, as we all know, if you have a color TV, you have to get the Channel Master color TV antenna, because the black and white antenna is just never going to work on the color TV.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
we got to get a digital antenna now.
Right, a digital antenna, exactly.
well, I don't know if you guys remember, but years ago in the Parade magazine that came in your Sunday's paper, they would advertise these rabbit ears that had like a little satellite dish on top of, you know, looked like a little miniature thing. And they were talking about how wonderful it was. And finally, there was a sentence in it that said, well, you're not getting cable because you're not paying for cable. But they were talking about how many stations it would bring in. But everything they said about it was actually true. But also, the same would apply to a coat hanger wire as well.
I have one of those little satellite dish with the rabbit ears on the side. It's kind of brown plastic kind of thing with decals on it. I've got one. I use it to bring in digital signals over the air.
I've got 3 of them. I think I've even got one new in a box somewhere that I picked up at yard sales, you know, and you find that stuff occasionally at yard sales. People stuff it in their attic or something, and then the millennials sell the house out, and there you find something that's antique.
Hey, I wonder if at this point maybe we can go down some of the questions that came up in the chat, so we can we can all give a shot at coming up with some answers for people that were asking. I just like to mention, I think it was John Novosaki was asking, what's the most interesting thing that you ever found in a radio or TV? I can tell you that I think the New Jersey Antique Radio Club has won that one hands down for now and forever. If you go on our website, you can see a news story that the New York City Evening News did on us when we went out and picked up some radios at from an estate. There was we found $10,000 in fresh $100 bills inside one of the radios. I challenge anyone to come up with a better find inside a radio than that. But maybe people found something else interesting too.
Well, I don't know how you define better. How do you define better, Dave? Because we had one come into the shop that was an old 1930s radio, the arts cabinet one, and we start taking the chassis out, and we found a handgun in it, an old rusted handgun. And apparently we were talking to the owners, and it was their grandfathers or something, and he was active in the Purple Gang, and that was his little hideaway piece, that if somebody broke into his house or something, he could grab that and start
If
blasting.
somebody broke into his house, he would unbolt the chassis, slide the chassis into the set, reach under the
I don't know how it got there or what, but I mean, we've had all kinds of weird stuff show up in there. I mean, one guy found a small envelope with pot in it. I mean, your imagination could run wild, and someone's probably seen it.
I will only concede to you if he found over $10,000 worth of pot. Okay.
That's never happened. So
the gun was a cold piece. The gun was a cold piece. It was a cold piece gun. It was one you kept around in case you needed to kill somebody. You had a gun that you had hid away that couldn't be traced.
Yeah, that could have been it too.
Did they get to keep the $10,000?
No, that's why we were on the news. We did the right thing and we sent it back. Although somebody did tell us that we should have called the owner up and said, "Hey, we found your $5,000 in the radio." But we didn't do that. Let's see.
I have to go, but I've got something I forgot to cover earlier So, and then is our sweepstakes. Normally we have the drawing at the convention, but because the grand prize is having its cabinet restored, it's not going to be ready until the convention. So instead, we're going to show it at the convention and start the sales of the sweepstake tickets at the convention, and then we'll have the drawing about 3 months later. The prize this year is a pre-war RCA TRK-5 set. It was donated to the museum. The cabinet had some water damage and a fair amount of water, in fact, quite a bit of water damage, and it's being completely restored. So the guy who is doing this has done magnificent work on other sets before. So I suspect it's going to look like new. So anyway, it'll be at the convention, and it's a major, yeah, there it is, I guess just as it arrived there. But anyway, it's a real opportunity. We'll be selling the tickets, and of course, it's a fundraiser for the museum. It's one of our major sources of revenue. So just thought I'd let you know about that. And I want to thank our panel. It was very informative. It brought back all kinds of memories for me. I mean, it's been many, many years since I repaired sets for customers, but it was back in the 60s, the last time I did it. But it brought back all kinds of memories. And there were the same issues back then as there are today. So thank you again. It was very informative and I enjoyed it. I'll see you all next month.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so long.
So if we want to keep working our way down the list or not, but so somebody was asking about PCBs leaking out of things in the sets. I'm personally unaware of any consumer televisions that would have had PCBs in the sets, except possibly some of the pre-war sets. Anybody got any opinions on that?
I've never seen a PCB cap in a TV set.
Very rare to find them in anything, actually. Even most of the communications military ones, PCBs were out of favor a long time before most of these sets come out. Not saying that they never did have them, but when I pulled apart TRK 12 and 9 power supply, those are oil filled, and when you open one of them up, all this really nice oily shit comes out of them. I don't know what it is, never did figure it out, but you end up with a nice, maybe 2 or 3 ounces of this stuff.
Yeah, I think you're going to die.
What's that?
Yeah, according to the expert, we're all dead.
Yeah, I should have been dead, 10, 15 years ago, if that's the case.
Some British TVs had flybacks that were, or even triplers that used 3 things like EY51 little wire-ended diodes, and they were actually oil-filled. Things like the Decca 1000 projection set, for example, had that.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I remember the Decca had an oil power supply.
Yeah.
But
well, oil filled even back in the 60s was typically PCBs. So I think that those TRK caps might be a little suspicious.
Well, so be it.
I used to work for a utility. Can I get on? I used to work for a utility. The big transformers had PCBs in them, but before that, they had ordinary oil. And the reason they put PCBs in was for a fire retardant. So they were not always around, and then they're not always around, and then they had to take the PCBs out, change all the oils in the transformers and so on. So they weren't a really early thing, but I could believe like in the 60s they were around. Whether they ever put them in televisions or radios, I don't know.
My understanding, it was an expensive substance. They wouldn't just use it because they could. They would only use it if they had to. Right. So I really don't think it made its way into consumer electronics.
We had a radio station here in Knoxville that it was an AM station, was a 50 kilowatt AM station. And the modulation transformers in there, man, those things were huge. They're about as tall as the building itself. And I don't know how many hundreds or even 1,000 gallons those things held, but they were suspected. They were originally filled with PCBs, but they told me that they tested it and they found it to be mineral oil. But someone else told me, says, well, that's what they've been telling the FCC and stuff. But they think they were full of mineral oil. But the station, it's not there anymore, but I think they've been done away with. So I don't know what happened to those things. But whatever it was done secretly.
Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Yeah, Dave. It's Dan. I'm gonna have to drop off because my power finally came back, so I got to go out and shut off the generator and put everything back on the panel. So
thank you.
But
Thanks
it was
for-
fun to be part of this. Thank you for inviting me to it.
Yep, it was great. It was interesting and a lot of fun. So thanks for your participation there, sir.
No
It was
problem. Thank you.
It was mentioned that some of you guys don't like to work on audio equipment because of audio files. And we have a den
Audio
of them here.
fools.
They have a den of them here in Knoxville, and they just absolutely drive me nuts. But I learned some audio file, what do you call it? Proper procedures there. I was invited to one of their get-togethers there one time, and I was listening to a CD that I'd picked out. He had like 1,000 of them there, but they have what they call the sweet spot in there. What I did not know that you're supposed to sit there for about 2 minutes, then you get up and relinquish the sweet spot to somebody else. Well, I think I sat there for a half an hour. Well, I had 2 people that let me know about that real quick, and I've never been invited back. And they come up with, and there's another one here that builds his own amplifiers. And I think there's like 3 audio files here that they kind of got into a pissing match of whose stereo is what, and I just get sick and tired of listening to it because they're not really listening to music. They say, oh, did you hear that violin or that horn, or it did this or that? Absolutely no regard to the music. I'm thinking, don't you guys ever listen to the music? And this other audio file, I forget the name brand of it, but you might know what they are. They're these solid wooden horns. I mean, huge, look like big megaphones. And the wood on them is about 4 inches thick, it seems like, all the way around it. And he plays it at low volume. And he says, listen to that. Did you hear that? These didn't sound like anything to me. I mean, nothing. I'm sitting there listening to it, and I can't even hear anything really. And they thought they were the most wonderful things since sliced bread. Audio files. Oh, hate these people.
I think the best I ever heard was from a manufacturer saying, we don't put any writing on our capacitors because we found that actually affects the audio quality. And I'm just sitting there trying not to crack up.
Do any of you remember years ago, they made speakers that were in the shape of an eardrum? And they said, this is the natural way to hear sound. Do any of you remember that? It was advertised as such.
Yep. Yeah, I remember those things. They were sort of, in fact, there's still, somebody still makes them. I think they're made in Germany. And they do, like you say, they look like the inside of a conch shell or your eardrum. And they're about 6 or 7 foot high is what these things are. And they're stupid money, of course, because again,
this is the natural way to hear sound.
Yeah, but again, you gotta remember that most of everything you deal with the audio people is, if it sounds good, it's got to cost a lot of money. And if it costs a lot of money, it has to sound good.
Pick up an audiophile magazine, and they sell gold-plated fuses in there. Because
oh yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, 35. They have like 3 AGs in there for like $35 each. They say this is the right way to hear sound. What has a fuse got to do with sound and the power supply like that? Do these fuses pass something or keep something out, or it makes absolutely no sense. But they're advertised like that. $35 for a 3 AG fuse.
Yep.
This thing is these things here are tube toppers. They're $39 each, and they're supposed to improve they're sort of a mass damper, and it has a fantastic effect on the bass. And it's one from a catalog of a company that makes all sorts of things like this.
Well, you know, the plates have to move at a certain frequency to make it all sound good.
The advertising script on it is quite interesting.
I'd like to make a historical observation. My neighbor brought his middle daughter over to look at my CTC5 because, of course, she had never seen a TV set like that. So I hooked up the power cord and got everything running. And he commented about, oh, note that it takes a while for it to warm up. And my thought was, yeah, we used to have tube electronics that took a while to warm up. Then we got solid state that came on instantly. And now we have software controlled TVs that we have to wait for them to boot.
I've been dealing with 12AX7 since I was about 11 years old. A 12AX7 to me is a 12AX7. If it's like an RCA or a name brand. And but they'll come up with names for these, like a halo getter or black plate or a gray plate, and the plate structure, you know, and these guys talk like they really know what they're doing. And so sometimes I like to yank their chain a little bit. I'll be at a ham fest, and there's always what I call tube mongers that show up, you know, looking for these things. And they'll start bragging about a Halo 12AX7, a Mullard or something. So I always say, yeah, how about that? And I say, do you run this Class A or Class B? You know, I'd sit there and bullshit them, you know. And I'll say, well, what do you bias your 12AX7 at? Or what do you do with it? You know, how many volts do you run on your Mullard tube or something like that? Boy, that'll usually stop 9 out of 10 of them in their tracks. They don't even know what you're talking about.
If people want to disagree about how something sounds, they need to have their hearing tested and be sure that they're both have the same hearing ability before they can have any argument.
Exactly. I had a fella that I used to do some repair work, and he was sort of not really an audiophile per se, but he had, you know, $15,000 speakers, $30,000 amplifiers, the whole 9 yards. And one time he wanted me to put those big, huge connectors on a Williamson amplifier from the 50s so he could put monster cables on it. So we're down in the basement and I'm going over the thing. And I decided, well, I'm going to see what this thing sounds like myself. So I hooked up a generator on it and I'm running through the frequencies. And he said, what are you doing? I said, just playing through the signals, see what kind of frequency response we got just by ear, nothing fancy. And he said, oh, I said, well, here, listen to it. We got up to about 5K and that was it. He couldn't hear anything past that. Completely deaf above 5K. So it's like, oh, well, so much for his audio capabilities.
There's a guy here in Knoxville, one audiophile. He has 16 15-inch speakers in his wall, 8 of them per channel there. But the way he has them mounted in the wall, he has the speaker baskets back to back. And the speakers don't actually touch, but he's got some PVC, PVC pipe there that keeps the baskets. And the theory, and they have holes in them, sort of. But the theory on that is that when they're delivering a deep bass signal, it's the speaker baskets could actually move. And so when they move backwards with each other, the PVC pipe keeps the basket rigid in there. And I'm just wondering if anybody could ever hear the difference in that. But that's their theory.
Hey, I want to just jump in again here, just to take care of, I guess there was like a last question that came up. One of the fellas was asking about the CRT rebuilding. If you go on the Early Television Museum's website, there is a whole plethora of pages there with all the updates. Our CRT rebuilding has been and probably will remain stalled. But the second business, the one down in Maryland, is slowly being put together, and we do expect, or at least we hope, that it'll be open for business someday. But currently is not happening. But the latest information will always be on the Early Television website. So just wanted to answer that question when it came up. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Alexander from Poland, if you're still on the call here, just to welcome you. I mentioned that I've never been there, but you're in my ancestral homeland there. So you're also up pretty late, I guess. So welcome to our meeting.
In the late 60s, when I was in high school, I worked for a picture tube rebuilding plant here in Knoxville. It was Mercer's Tube Company, and I learned every aspect about rebuilding a tube. I think that they can rebuild tubes today, but the only problem is getting gun mounts. I remember we used to order gun mounts from Superior Tube Company, and I'm sure they're long gone. And I learned how to pour a bonded face and how to pull the bonded face off on a production basis and stuff. But I've still wondered about that. I remember when Paul went out of business finally, I had a chance to get the lathes, the vertical and the horizontal lathe, and I think they just got scrapped. And he had 4 ovens to cook the tubes out in, and how they, making the diffusion pumps work, and then the bombarder there to do the cathode in a CRT.
Well, Nick's got that stuff, and he built an oven big enough to handle a 30 BP4, and he actually found a source for new guns.
Really?
Well, that was the good news. The bad news is, and the guy sent him some samples, and apparently they worked out. They were actually quite usable. The bad news is that the source is in Russia, so that's not working.
Well, up in Chicago, they had for the Chicago the baseball team up there, they had their tote board up there, the scoreboard. It's like a video, and it had thousands of little RGB, actually little CRTs. Each one was like a pixel, I guess. And I have some samples of it, and they were building gun mounts. But anyway, this is a long time ago, but they only built one of those boards. But, can you imagine a color picture with thousands of little CRTs in it? Each one was a red, blue, and a green. And I've got samples of all 3. And I've often wondered, could that have been them? They were capable of building the gun mounts for those little things. But can you imagine the high voltage what they had to do in that tote board to make that thing work? Each one of those had to have its own amplifier. Figure that one out. And I bet that was expensive.
Tell you what, if I knew where things were heading, we should have gotten a busload of people to go to Hawkeye along with Nick to learn how to rebuild picture tubes.
Well, in Russia,
I was just kidding.
It's just like just regular receiving tubes. When RCA and Westinghouse, Sylvania, when they were closing down their plants, some of the equipment got scrapped, but most of it actually went to Russia. We gave them to them, and now they're building them in kind of like the Japanese did it with us with scrap metal. Now they're shooting them back at us now with higher prices. But I wonder if they got some of that equipment building picture tubes, that if they're building gun mounts over there, and how that'll stabilize. If they can build, like for a 21-inch round tube color.
Yeah.
Or what the quality would be like. But the secret to it is having a good oven, cooking them out, and a vacuum. I do remember every now and then one of the tubes would have probably a small scratch in it somewhere, and that's a problem, because we're in the oven cooking out. All of a sudden you'd hear a kaboom on it, and every one of the ovens in there looked like bombs had been going off in there. Where the glass. Talking about picture tubes, one thing that you got to remember about CRTs there, especially the ones with a bonded glass where they have a pressure band on it, do not, and I repeat, do not ever try to take a hacksaw and cut the pressure band off of a live tube. I guarantee you it'll probably implode, and you have to let the tube down there. years ago, I used to set up at the flea market, and I had like a walk-in TV service there. And then another guy came in out there. He was trying to sell used TVs like I was, and we always called him Brand X over there. He tried and stuff like that, but he just one day he was on the other side of the building, and I was on my side. And one afternoon, I heard this kaboom in there, and I said, "Oh my God, I know exactly what that is." I went running over there to see what had happened, and he was sitting down in the floor, like looking up, like, what happened? He got a banded tube there that had ears on it. It wouldn't fit in I guess, a Xena set, because if you ever replace tubes in a Xena set, you know what I'm talking about. He had to cut the ears off of the thing there. So what he didn't know anything about the pressure band, and he cut the pressure band on it, and the tube imploded. And I mean, there were chunks of it, just by the grace of God, nobody got hurt. Man, there were customers in that place running every which way like a bomb had gone off. And I'm looking around, and there were chunks of glasses bigger than my fist just laying within a 40 foot radius there. And, you know, that's an experience. I mean, I can't believe it. And I said, don't you ever do that again. But don't ever cut a pressure band off of a live tube, guaranteed, because the tubal, it's, you know, being used to being confined like that, when it expands a little bit and there's a crack in it, kaboom. Tip for the day. And plus, my weapon of choice in fixing things is a Simpson 260. You can have all your equipment there, but I love my Simpson 260.
My wife bought me one of those. Can you believe that?
The only thing a digital multimeter is good for is checking the power supply on your 5-volt supply in a computer. It has to be like 5.1, almost to the thing there. But as far as anything else goes, like general purpose and radio, I've made a lot of money with a Simpson 260.
Good product.
Years ago, there are TV shops there that would order out all of that expensive equipment, because I think most of it was for show. You know, they had those workbenches with all this built-in test equipment back there, and a lot of them didn't really even know how to use it. But over the years, when I do Hamfest, I would find television service equipment still new in the box. The box may have been open, but they never used it because they didn't know how to. They just thought this would help them fix TV sets. And I remember Syncor was making a VCR tester, you know, that you could use it for various things and testing a VCR. But I don't think I've ever found anybody that ever knew how to use one of those. Those things were like $2,500 back then. And it would, you know, simulate signals going through the head on the thing and stuff like that. But I don't know. But anyway, I've got some new equipment, and even tube testers still new in the box, never used, that I've found and saved over the years. I need to start selling some of that stuff.
Julian, would you describe a pressure band versus just a support band or a restraint? I'm not sure I could distinguish them.
Okay, most picture tubes, when they're mounted in a TV set, some of them would have like a hose clamp or something like that, and you'd put it together and hold some ears in it, like with a hose clamp. That's just a mechanical mounting where it would mount. And there were many sets, round tube sets. I used to replace a lot of picture tubes in the home, and I was really good on Xena sets, and they were easy to replace a tube in, and they didn't have those ears on it. Now, that's why a lot of round tube sets, they have a bonded face on it. You know what a bonded face is? A bonded face is where they put another face plate on the front of the tube, and they pour this resin in it. I think General Electric, I can't remember the name of the stuff, but they used to order it from GE. It was some kind of, and you had to mix it, you know, like you're mixing a hardener in a thing there. And so they put a face plate on it, because even your old TV sets, you know, 1950s, they have a raw tube in the set, but they have a piece of like automotive glass safety glass in front of it. They had to have a safety plate on it. You didn't have a raw tube like that. Then they discovered that you could, it's just like in any manufacturing process, it's always better, faster, and cheaper, not necessarily in that order. But they found out rather than putting a bonded face on it, that they would just put a pressure band on it. And the theory behind that is they'd put this clamp, in packing containers, they have that little drill like thing there, and they're doing a pressure band and fastening up a crate and stuff like that. And then they crimp it. They put that little, what do they call it? I can't think of names anymore. But anyway, when they put a pressure band on it, they run it down with this air pneumatic tool, and it pulls the band real tight around the tube. And then it has that little, it's a locking device. Then you have a great big pair of tongs there that you put on that little crimp there, and you crimp it. Now it's locked into place. You can do that when the tube is live, but you never want to cut that band on that thing and release that pressure on it while the tube is live. It's a pressure band, and it's essentially the same stuff that they band crates with, even to this day. They put, it comes off of a roll, it's that metal band, and then they wrap it around the package and they pull it tight, and then they put that little crimping thing on it, and then they take those big pincher things and it crimps it and it holds it in place. And that's what they do. They pressure band the tube on it. And it was mostly in the late 60s, 70s, and that way they didn't have to have a faceplate on the front of the TV set, and the tube itself was exposed, just right there. So it didn't have to have a bonded face, and it didn't have to have any safety glass in front of it. That was the whole theory, and it actually worked quite well. It was a safety thing, but they never thought that anybody would try and interchange a tube there and cut the ears off of it in a pressure band. And you never see that in the books, nor did they ever teach it there. But I learned that from other people's experiences there. Does that answer your question, or?
Yes. Do you only experience it in round tubes, or did
No, I've
rectangular
never seen a round tube that had a pressure band on it. They only put bonded face on them. It's like you take a round tube that's a 21 FV22. That's just the raw tube itself, and that would be installed in a TV set that would have a safety plate glass. The safety plate's the same thing as a car windshield. It's 2 layers of glass with a plastic in between, and it's a safety plate that if anything happens, it'll shatter, but it won't go out in shards and fragments there. But I've never seen a round tube with a pressure band on it. Your 25 inchers, your 23 inch, and but your 25-inch tubes were famous for that. Also, in some of the other sets, and you can't interchange these, but they would have a metal frame that was the mounting frame, and they would have epoxy in it all the way around it, and it actually glue it to the tube itself. There's nothing you can do with that except use it for the purpose it was intended for. But most of the 23s and the 20, you had a true 25-inch. You had like a 25 GP22. That was actually a 23-inch tube. It's touted as a 25. But if you had a tube that has 4 letters in it, like a 25 VPX P22, that would be a true 25-inch. And most of those were pressure banded if they didn't have a bonded face on the front of it. But it was a cheaper way of building the tube and not putting a bonded face on it, because there's a lot more labor intensive to put a bonded face on it and pour the chemical in there. And it's done under, it's just more expensive and labor intensive. So what they would do is just wrap that metal band around the perimeter of the tube, and then they had the tool there that would wind it down, so to speak, if that makes sense, and it pulls it tight. But you've got that little crimping, I have to think about that tonight. I forget what they call it, little buckle on it. But anyway, they have that in there where the 2 layers would overlap, and they put that little buckle on it. And you've got those big pinchers there that when you'd crimp it, it would have like 4 crimps on each side of it. and it would lock that thing in place and it would not move. That's a pressure banded tube. And
Yeah,
Hey, Julian.
besides,
yes,
I was going to say I went into Manhattan one time, and a museum had had one of those 25-inch CRTs as part of one of their displays, and they had sent the tube out to be worked on, and spent an enormous amount of money on it, and it didn't blow up, but it cracked. And I went in to look at it. They asked me if I could take a look at it. They were wondering if we could do anything at the Early Television Museum to help them fix the tube. And I went in there and I looked at it, and it had cracked across the bell and across the faceplate. And the reason it had cracked is that the fellow that was going to work on the tube had tried to cut the pressure band off. And I said, nope, you're never going to fix that tube. That one is completely dead now.
No, when they're cracked like that, there's nothing you can do for it. And I remember Paul, we'd there were Magnavox used to be in our backyard here in Knoxville, and this is back in the 60s. And when they get warranty tubes in there, they'd send them to Paul for rebuilding there. He'd rebuild them here in Knoxville because Magnavox Phillips was based here in Knoxville, and they'd build TV sets up in Greenville, Tennessee. But yeah, I've seen tubes that would crack across the face there, and buddy, there's nothing you can do for that except throw it away.
another reason for the pressure band design was to allow flatter faceplate tubes, because the flattered faceplate tubes would not withstand the impact test
Yes.
without pre-stressing.
Yes, I left that part out. Actually, when you pressure band the tube there, the theory is if you throw something at the faceplate of a tube, what makes it implode when you throw, like if you were to throw a brick at a pressure banded tube, actually breaking one that way is difficult to do, because when you put pressure on the front of the tube, now remember it's beveled out, that it's made that before that tube can implode, that when that brick hits it, something has to expand. And if the perimeter of the tube cannot expand, then it won't break if you throw a brick against it. It'll eventually, but that's, I've seen people throw bricks and all stuff at a pressure banded tube, and they're very difficult to implode, throwing rocks at them or something like that. And but that's the whole idea. The pressure band keeps the perimeter of the tube from expanding, and if it can't expand, theoretically it won't break. And for most part, that's true. Then we have to deal with bonded faces now. They call them cataracts now, and to remove a faceplate off of a 21FJ or something like that, he had one of those infrared heaters, like the kind that mounts up in your ceiling, and it'd be like 2.5 feet by 2 feet or something like that, and it's fed with natural gas. But he had a little jig made up where he put the tube in it, and that heater would you couldn't touch the tube in the front for that bonded face on it. But anyway, you'd get it really so hot, and then with gloves, you'd pick the tube out of its jig, and it'd set it down in a drum thing that would hold it upright. And they had some piano wire with 2 wooden dowels, and you just feed it on one end, and you put your knee up. You could pull that wire right through that bonded face, that resin in there, and you just lift the glass right off of it. And then all of that resin that's on the tube, that stuff comes off real easy. We had like just a little razor blade scraper, and that stuff is easily peeled off of the face of the tube and all of that. And that's how they would do it before they would build the tube there. And anyway, the tube, they had a rack back there that they'd wash it in a sink-like structure there, and they'd put some soap compound they had and a brush, and they'd scrub all of the dag off of it and everything. And then from that point, then it would go into a rack, and that's where they would crack the tube there to let it down to air. but you don't let them down to air. You don't want moisture up in that tube. So what they did, they had these big cylinders of nitrogen, and it put like a black trash bag around the neck of the tube and tape it to it, that when they would have these tongs with that hot wire on it, they'd wrap the neck down there where they wanted it to break, and the wire going around the neck would get red hot, and it'd be there for about 10 seconds. Then he'd take it off there, he'd lick his finger and touch the tube, and it'd go chink, and it would crack. And then you put that bag around it and let it down to nitrogen there, and therefore no moisture in the air would get inside the tube, because if you get any moisture in the tube, it'll stain the phosphors on the front of the tube. And I used to see things like that some moisture did get up in there, and then you'd never know it until they'd fire the tube up after processing it, and you'd see a staining in it, and it'd sell them as seconds or something like that. If they were real bad, they'd just discard the tube because there's nothing you can do with it if it interfered with the quality of the picture. Does that make any sense?
Thank you very much for the elaboration.
I just wish I'd saved those lathes that he had. Those things were from, oh man, probably the 40s or the 50s. And those things were built, like they say, like a Mack truck. And I mean, they would last forever, but they were just so big and so heavy, and I had nowhere to put them at the time. But I could have had, I got his bombarder, but I could have had the ovens and everything. And had I known, you know, that crystal ball there back about 45 years ago, you know, I would have had something. I could have really had something for your museum up there, you know, real picture tube rebuilding. But I know how to feed the glass, feeding new glass on the neck of the tube and putting it in the vertical lathe and all of that. And you had crossfires on it, and there's a way to do that. And it's not rocket science, but there's just a little bit of magic that goes into it when you're lifting the gun mount up into the vertically mounted tube on it. And then you anneal the glass to the button of the gun mount. But I remember all that, but I don't know what you do today, because the mounts and the the lathes that they have today, they are the flimsiest looking things I have ever seen in my life. And I don't know how they'd handle a tube. But when you have your crossfires on it, you can't have just two of them pointing into each other. There's got to be like three of them on each side, that the glass has to be heated evenly. You can't have any hot spots on it, or it will not anneal properly to the button or the base of the new gun mount. And then you've got a stem on the bottom of the gun mount that goes down in your diffusion pump and seals off. And that is just a lot of little tricks to it. But, you know, once you start doing tubes and all that, you get used to it. But man, I just don't know what they can do today. And it'd be nice if they could build 15 GP22s, but I just understand that hasn't been too successful because of their nature, because they're metal, they're glass, and they've got that around the front of the tube there. I don't know, you know, it just, you know, 60, 70 years has not been kind to those tubes, especially when you're annealing metal to glass. That's never a good mixture.
Well, again, if you look on the early television website, one of the guys has experimented with and has been successful in removing the metal and doing a glass-to-glass seal there. It's all very experimental at this point, but the proof of concept worked out.
I'm glad to hear that somebody's working on that. You know, it can be done. You just have to get somebody that understands, you know, metal and glass and stuff like that, an expert in it. It's not something that you just think, well, I can glue it. And it's a special metal too. It's like a Mar metal. I think that's what they call that stuff. And it anneals to glass pretty good there. But man, working on those 21 AXP 22s and all of that, those things I was always amazed at how those things worked when they put that plastic cone around it. But a lot of those old CTC5 RCAs there, you know, we'd convert them over to a 21 FB instead of putting a metal tube in it.
If you remind me of something that I'm glad for about my CTC 5, and that is whatever plastic they used for the insulator cone has not deteriorated over all these years. So much plastic used in TV sets, especially some of the mid-60s zeniths, eventually dried out and crumbled. But whatever RCA used for that insulator cone, it seems like it truly lasts forever.
You know, I have, in all of the CTC 5s that I've ever seen, I have never seen that cone deteriorate. In fact, I have a spare one if anybody needs one, but they're just as good as they were. But, you know, of all the crazy things, they come up with all these plastics and stuff that just the ozone kills it. Speaker surrounds, for one thing. They can't get it right. But back in the early 50s, they come up with this plastic for that metal tube there, and they're just as good as they were the day they were made, and they still work and, you know, contain high voltage. I've never understood that, you know, why they can't do stuff like that today. If anybody needs any CTC 5 parts, I think I've got a spare chassis, I think, but I know I've got a tuner assembly and some stuff for one. And I've got that plastic housing there for the tube. But, one of these days.
Well, I got that back there that I'll be working on one of these days. So.
That was my first color TV set that I bought way back in 1967. I was 16 years old, and there was a furniture store that sold white goods and stuff, and I was calling around looking for a set. And anyway, I told him I was a student. And he said, well, we have a set here and it needs a picture tube in it. Well, anyway, I went and bought it for $25, and that was a big deal back then. Turned out there was a bad fuse there in a horizontal suite, and that set worked just perfect. And my dad got so mad at me one day, and he made me take it out of my bedroom and put it in the living room so the whole family could enjoy it.
Did you have a glass plant dedicated to making TV tubes in Knoxville?
Now, ask me that question again. Did we have a glass?
Did you have a glass plant in Knoxville that made TV glass?
Oh, TV? No, actually, Corning Glass up there in New York somewhere made the bells for those picture tubes and all of that. We never, I mean, we had a rebuilding plant here, but that's all we did was just put a new gun in it. And, but the bell itself, a lot of times you can look on it, they'll say 25 on it for like a 25-inch or something. And it'll have a kind of it's cast in the glass, a big C, which is Corning. Corning was responsible for most of the bells on those tubes. But we had to order out glass stock for the neck and all of that. But that, I think we got all that stuff from Superior Tube Company.
I worked for a company called United McGill, and we made electrostatic precipitators. And it was a Japanese patents on the process. And we installed electrostatic precipitators at a number of TV glass foundries. There was one here in Columbus. There was one in Circleville, Ohio. We did plant at Corning. Trying to think other plants that we installed the precipitators on. But I just thought maybe you had a glass plant there.
No, that was something that was that would be bigger than Knoxville itself. We never would have done anything like that. Usually those glass plants are where they manufacture the tubes themselves, like up in New Jersey or New York, like Corning Glass or something. they would supply the raw, the bells for those tubes there, and they would have to be somewhat close by because that stuff is a little tricky to ship in quantity, and they would be done in racks, I think, but they'd be very close by to RCA or Sylvania or GE or even Westinghouse. But back in the late in the 60s, the manufacturer that made its own picture tubes would be their longevity in the TV business, because there were some manufacturers, Zenith bought Rulon out to make their tubes, and Rulon tubes were really not that great in Zenith. But if you made your own picture tubes, you wouldn't have to worry about a supplier for tubes. Now you take people like Curtis Mathis and some of the other smaller brands, Admiral maybe. I don't think Admiral ever had their own plant, but they were dependent upon the manufacturing capabilities of tube manufacturing plants. And if they couldn't get tubes, they couldn't make TV sets. And that's why a lot of them, they would buy the plant. One was the National Video Corporation up there, and they were the one making those 23 EGP22s, and those were terrible tubes. Most of them never even made it out of warranty, and they just had sloppy labor and stuff. But anyway, the National Video Corporation was about bankrupt, and Motorola either bought them or did something with them, but that was a disaster. And but if you could make your own tubes like RCA and Westinghouse or GE, then you could, manufacture sets. But that was the key to it, is making your own tubes.
I worked at Motorola from 66 to 75, and during that time, Admiral did make tubes. Of course, they didn't make the glass, but they had a tube plant. Motorola's tube plant was not the best, but Admiral was definitely the worst. And I recall at one year, the bean counters at Motorola determined that Motorola would buy a certain quantity of tubes from Admiral, and the engineering staff was up in arms because they said those are all going to come back in warranty, and it's going to affect our profit sharing.
Oh, you bet. Well, you see, back in about the time in 1964, well, actually around 1965 is when they started making rectangular tubes. And I do remember some of the commercials there, when they were touting the TV set, they said, this is a square, it's a rectangular screen. It's not round anymore. And they would show this guy taking his TV apart and say, well, I'll be darned. It isn't a round tube. It's actually rectangular. Well, Motorola came out with essentially the first rectangular tube, and that was that 23 EGP22. And I think they had a lot of they had sloppy people and people that didn't know what they were doing, and they were trying to keep this plant alive. But Motorola, they were buying those tubes from them, and I mean, even when they were in perfect condition, they were just extremely soft. And then it wasn't much longer after that, about a year after that, they started issuing kits and new bezels there to convert it to a 25-inch or a 25 GP22 instead of the 23 EG. And incidentally, when you find old TV sets at yard sales and stuff like that, finding a 23 EG Motorola, I have one. It's in a home entertainment center, and I found it at a church rummage sale. And it's not, I don't like the set in particular, but it's something you'll never see again. Finding one of those, because most of those were junked and done away with, 50 years ago, 55 years ago. People abandoned them or traded them in. And
yeah, I recall Admiral warranty in their TVs, warranting their picture tube for 2 years, where everybody else was 1 year. And it was their attempt to quash their lousy reputation for picture tube failures. And I think they ate the warranty cost on every one of those.
Yeah, that was a big selling point. And I remember when Curtis Mathis was building sets, they always touted them that the most expensive TV on the market, but darn well worth it. And all they were doing was buying RCA tubes or whatever tube they could get. They made their own cabinets and they used JVC chassis in their thing. And they would assemble them. I think it's down in Austin, Texas, where they made these sets. But actually, there were big screens, internal projection sets. They didn't build those when they were manufacturing Magnavox stuff here in Greenville, Tennessee. They showed them on TV one day. This is a long time ago, but they were showing them manufacturing their Magnavox sets in the plant, and they were putting them in Curtis Mathis boxes here. They let that slip by on the news there, but they did a lot of contract marketing. And if you went to J.C. Penney, they had Pencrest sets. A J.C. Penney set was usually, I think a GE. No, J.C. Penney was RCA. And then they had W.T. Grant that sold Bradford sets. Those were General Electrics. And the Curtis Mathis, they're smaller 19-inch sets. They were Samsungs. And they were, if you remember the little 12-inch black and white sets they made with click stop tuners, it was a set that would normally cost $99.95. Well, the Curtis Mathis black and white 12-inch sets were $299.95. And what they were Samsungs. And they just put a warranty on it. Now, I remember when Magnavox was here, I knew all the guys that worked up there in the engineering department. I've still got a lot of pieces that they were engineering. And I have a prototype set when they were trying to experiment with a 35-inch with a Mitsubishi picture tube in it. But those little 12-inch black and whites that you would get from Samsung, they had an owner's manual that would be like an automobile owner's manual. And I've got one, and the guy, one of the engineers up there at Magnavox, put it in a typewriter and said, look what kind of an owner's manual they're putting with a $99.95 set here, and it's a very elaborate owner's manual. Why can't we make something like that? Because all they were putting in their sets was like a little leaflet that was folded in half. But you know, what does it take to operate a 12-inch black and white set, you know? But he was just commenting on a cheap set from Japan, and it had an elaborate owner's manual with it, you know, and I've still got that. Why do I remember all this stuff all of a sudden? I've got stuff packed away that one of these days I'll get it out, show it. But anyway, I hope that answers some questions there for you, the best of my knowledge, if I can be of any help. Well, it's getting kind of late here, so I've got to go to church in the morning, so I guess I'll sign off for the night here. Anybody still out there? Or did I put everybody to sleep here?
Sounds like we may have petered out here.
We may have. Well, I guess I better sign off here for tonight, and till next time. And if anybody has any questions, my email address is real easy. It's julianburke51@gmail.com. If anybody wants me to answer a question, if I don't know the answer, there's still some of those engineers around Knoxville here that I know, and I can always ask them.
You
But
still have 27 viewers.
Oh, okay.
And thanks.
But anyway, if you ever get down to Knoxville, I got enough to keep you busy for hours in my building. I got all kinds of crap down here. And everything I have is original, no reproductions and stuff. That's what I look for. And studio cameras. I've got a bunch of those. I guess when I come up to the Early Television Foundation in May, I've got some studio cameras. I've got a few there I might bring up there and see if I can do something with them. But anyway, I hope everybody has a blessed evening. And I guess this is Julian Burke signing off for the night. Good night, folks.
Thank you. This was very fascinating to sit in and listen in on.